The Hurling Show, brought to you in association with Torpy. Torpy are leading hurling into a new future with Bamboo, a revolutionary hurley created using their unique engineered hurling performance know-how. Already being used by many inter-county players, Torpy's Bamboo is highly sustainable, offers players greater striking distance and a more consistent balance every time, without compromising on natural feel. Check them out on the Torpy website and in the link below, and enter the promo code OurGame to get yourself 10% off. Hello and welcome to the Hurling Show here on OurGame. Myself, Shane Stapleton, Michael Verney here with me as ever. Michael, how's she cutting?
All good, Shane. Yeah, all good. Lots to talk about even outside the club. It's amazing. I've noticed over the last couple of years, particularly in our job, the off-season just is not an off-season anymore. There's always something happening, be it the managerial merry-go-round, be it players retiring, be it one manager potentially going here or going to another place, and then obviously players open up a bit in the off-season as well. So there's always so much to talk about. It's a real 365 days of the year job. It doesn't really stop. Christmas Day is probably the one day where there's not some sort of breaking news story.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Press the button in the bottom right-hand corner if you're watching on YouTube. Follow on all the other social channels. There's different updates going out all over the place. Also, if you want the audio podcast, please do support the channel on patreon.com/OurGame. Really helps the channel grow. Michael, no better place to start than the All-Star nominations. This kind of snuck up on me a little bit. Obviously, you're aware of what time of the year it comes out. But then the email dropped this morning and I was just a little bit caught off guard with it. But we see that the three Hurler of the Year nominations, there's no massive surprise in any of that. Keane Lynch, Kyle Hayes, Sean Finn. Sorry, there's no surprise with Keane Lynch being named in there. Were you surprised by the other two?
Wasn't surprised by Hayes. I did expect three Limerick players, but when Sean Finn probably wouldn't have been like, he was the best cornerback this season, I would say. Yeah, he was the best cornerback this season, hands down. But I probably would have had a handful of other players ahead of him going for that overall award, particularly probably Tom Morrissey, Seamus Flanagan as well, who had his best year ever for Limerick. Morrissey continued on last year's form. Finn, to me, was brilliant again this year, but he'd probably been better other years. But, you know, and it's just probably the way it worked out this year. There was three Limerick lads had to be picked. It's funny that there's two defenders in there as well, because there's often the bias to look at what a forward has done. So look at what Flanagan, Lynch, Morrissey could easily have those three picked. So from a back's point of view, it is good to see strong representation. But I probably would have had either Flanagan or Morrissey ahead of Finn, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I definitely think I'd have had Tom Morrissey in here ahead of both Finn and Hayes, actually. Okay. I'd have him higher in the pecking order in both. Like Tom Morrissey, did he score something like 6 points against Tipperary in the Munster final? You know, when they were under the cosh, he was still one of the few players who was played pretty well. I think earlier in the year, he didn't look like he was going to have necessarily the same stellar season as 2020. And I thought he was Hurler of the Year last year. So is there just something slightly unfashionable about Tom Morrissey that, I mean, I don't feel that way because I would have had him Hurler of the Year last year and I'd have him nominated this year. But is there something that other people are finding so unfashionable about him?
I'm not sure. He's definitely the hardest done player to have not been nominated for Hurler of the Year over the past two. He could be the hardest done player of all time to have never been nominated for Hurler of the Year. Like, there is no doubt about it. He was in the top three hurlers last year. Like, there's no debate. And I would be the same as you. While Gerard Hegarty shot the lights out, I think a lot of that was as a direct result of what Morrissey did. And he obviously had that man of the match display in the semi-final in 20, and he had the man of the match display in the semi-final in the 2021 game as well. And he was good in the final. He scored 3, and he was outstanding against Tip. And he was the one actually taking it to Tip when everyone else was going quite poorly. And I think he ended up with six points that day. So yeah, I don't know if anyone, I can't think of anybody else that jumps out over the last 20 years that should have been nominated for Hurler of the Year more than him. And he still hasn't been in the mix in the 2 years, but it's just been outstanding. Is
Keane Lynch soon heading into GOAT territory here? Like, he's going to win Hurler of the Year, right? I mean, he should win Hurler of the Year. Actually, a quick word then, and we're talking about Tom Morrissey not getting nominated. John Conlon, I felt, was very hard done by in 2018. I thought he was absolutely exceptional. I'm not saying to win Hurler of the Year, but not to be too far away, because definitely a nomination was something that I felt he should have had. And you and I actually said a couple of years ago that Paddy Smith should have got a nomination for an All-Star ahead of Owen O'Donnell, in fact. And again, he misses out here. And, you know, when you look at his performance against TJ Reid in the Leinster final for a COVID-riddled Dublin, geez, that was very impressive.
Yeah, no, that was brilliant. And again, a lot of it's not flashy stuff, to be honest with you. It's, I mean, in the best way, it's underhand kind of work. You know, it's not big flashy catches or anything like that. It's just doing what has to be done to kind of spoil a lad. And I thought he was brilliant 2 years ago, and he's brilliant again this year, and he's very hard done by. You mentioned John Conlon being hard done by in 18. John Conlon's probably hard done by not to get a nomination this year as well. When you look at it, you know, overall, take the first couple of league games aside, he was brilliant in an unfamiliar position at centre back. So I would definitely say those two are hard done by. Dublin are probably hard done by overall with just one nomination. But just going back to the Keane Lynch debate, like Keane Lynch is going to be a 2-time hurler of the year, and he's 25.
Yeah.
The other 2-time hurler of the years are Brian Whelan, DJ Kerry, and Brian Corcoran, and Henry Shefflin is out on his own with 3. Shefflin's last hurler of the year was in 2012 in his early 30s. Keane Lynch is 25. And I put it this way. You asked, could he go down as the GOAT? Limerick to me are going to win 2 of the next 3 All-Irelands. Minimum in my opinion. And that could be the next 2 All-Irelands, and then, or they could win the next 3. But I'm just saying, I think they'll win 2 of the next 3, in no particular order. So he's on the best team in the country and a team that looks like dominating for another couple of years. He's their really key player in the sense that everything goes through him. Like, there's a distinct possibility that he could be crowned Hurler of the Year again within the next 3 years. His age profile would suggest that. The form he's in would suggest that. The fact that he's a non-drinker definitely helps. The fact that he's not going to go off the rails.
I mean this in the best possible way. The opposite of Keane Lynch, he is a flashy type player. But he's not just flash. There's massive substance under it. So I'm almost saying it as it is a positive there. You mentioned Henry Shefflin, right? So he was born in 1979. He won his first Hurler of the Year in 2002. So he was 23. Then he won it again in 2006. So he's probably 26 at that stage, if my maths add up. Actually, maybe he'd gone 27 if he was born in 1979. And then you mentioned again 6 years later in 2012. Now, we know that for the next number of years in the Hurling Championship, the opposition imploded. Like, Cork went on their strikes, and, you know, did a piece with John Myler before, and he felt that the ramifications of the 3, Cork more or less decommissioned themselves as a top weapon for a few years there. Tipperary were a little bit off it. Waterford, maybe because of their long drought in All-Ireland territory and coming through Munster, it was more difficult for them to make the breakthrough. Obviously, Leinster was a wasteland for Kilkenny there for years. So there's a big opportunity for Kilkenny lads to rack up the Hurlers of the Year, like Owen Larkin, Tommy Walsh, Michael Fennelly obviously won it, and Henry won it a few times, and JJ Delaney. But I wonder, is it going to be the case that the opposition that Limerick are going to face in the next few years are going to present as poor a challenge as maybe some of those teams did in the noughties?
Potentially, because you looked at like Cork going into the final this year, and you definitely did, and many other people did, thought that they were going to pose a big challenge, and they obviously, you know, they were steamrolled in the final, and the psychological effects of that will be seen next season and probably over the next couple of seasons. But you'd imagine their growth has been stunted a small bit as a result of that. Waterford are the next best team. We both have said they're the next best team. They haven't won Munster. They haven't won a league in a couple of years. They haven't, you know, they've no silverware of any note. And Limerick have beaten them by 4 points in a Munster final, 11 points in an All-Ireland final, and 11 points in an All-Ireland semi-final. So, you know, Tipperary were the closest to them this year, 5 points away, but were probably blown away in the second half. So you are looking at that there is a bit of a chasm between them and the chasing pack. It's like that time they said about when I think it was it Eclipse, when Eclipse won some big race. It was like Eclipse first, the rest nowhere. And that's kind of where Limerick are. There's that big of a gap between them and the chasing pack. So there's definitely, back to the Keane Lynch debate, there's definitely a serious opportunity. Like, he could have 3 hurlers of the year by 2023 or 2024 easily, and he could still have another 4 or 5 years left in his county career.
Yeah, realistically, he's got, like, a lot of players now, they're kind of approaching being done at the age of 31, 30, the odd lad even 29 now. But I wonder, like, when you look at the S&C level of some of these Limerick lads, are they more approaching, like, I'm not going to say quite at a professional level, because they're going to have their day jobs, which will make that be impossible to do. But you look at, and I mentioned this before, the Euro 2020 obviously played in 21 captains. 1/3 of the captains were aged 35 and older. So obviously that's a big difference we're seeing with professional players. They're able to look after themselves better and maintain better and play for much longer. What age will Keane Lynch be playing up to? Does he have another 5 chances where he's at the the top of his health physicality wise, where he can kind of push for Hurler of the Year, or will it be 7 or 8 years more? So if Limerick continue on this dominant run, there's every chance that he'll do what we're talking about here. And that then, like if he goes ahead of Henry Shefflin, will that make him the GOAT? And that's a question I throw out to everyone out there. Or does he need to win, 11 All-Stars? Does he need to win 10 All-Irelands? What will it require for Keane Lynch to become the GOAT? I'd love to get a few comments in about that.
But just on that, like, just say he does win another Hurler of the Year. Like, we're taking it for granted that he wins Hurler of the Year this year. If he doesn't, it's an absolute farce.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought you were going to say we're taking it for granted he's going to win it again another season. He probably will.
I definitely wouldn't be ruling it out at this stage. Like, he could have just say he has Hurler of the Year in 2 years' time. So he'd have one in 18, 21, and we'd say 23. And just say he finishes up in 2026 or something like that at the age of 30. He'll have 3 hurlers of the year. He won't have maybe the same volume done as Shefflin, but he'll still have 3 hurlers of the year. Look at all the greats that we've seen in recent years that only have 1 hurler of the year. TJ Reid, Seamus Callanan, Richie Hogan, Tony Kelly, Joe Canning. Do you know what I mean? He's already going to have 2, and like, it's not far-fetched to say the best of his career is still to come. As you were talking there, I was only thinking as well, what's going to be really interesting when he's coming to the latter stages of his Limerick career, I've talked about this before, how skillful he is. His legs will have slowed down a bit, but it'll be interesting to see what role and what way hurling has evolved by then. He'd still have everything in the wrist. He'd still have that speed of thought. So it'll be interesting to see whether, will he be midfield? Will he go back in corner forward? Will he play some sort of a free role? It's going to be interesting to see. Yeah, maybe. When his legs slow down, it'll be really interesting to see where he goes. And
just even looking at the last, we'll say 10 hurlers a year. I'll go back to 2011, like Michael Verney. Like, where does he rank in terms of these hurlers of the year? Do you know what? I'm going to go back to Lara in 2010. But where does he rank in terms of these hurlers of the year? Get your comments in. So we obviously have Lara in 2010. Michael Verney 2011 was absolutely brilliant. So was Shefflin in 2012. I mean, he turned around the drawn All-Ireland final and the replay, of course. Tony Kelly 2013, thrilling. Richie Hogan was unreal in 2014, even though I think he was taken off in the replay against Tipperary, but he'd still done so much that season. He deserved it. TJ Reid in 2015. Ozzie Gleeson won it in 2016. Now, he did some class things, but it really should have been Seamus Callanan or Paddy Maher that year. I think most people would say that. Some won't, but comment and tell me why I'm wrong. Joe Canning, 17. I thought it was Pádraig Mannion that year, but I do think Canning was unbelievable in 2018 when Lynch deservedly won it. Then Callanan, 19, and Groat Hegarty won it last year. Fairly unanimously, but I would have felt it was Tom Morrissey. Where does Keane Lynch's 2021 season, assuming he wins it, fit into that list?
Yeah, it's like, looking back at those seasons, I probably, like, Henry was the one in 12 that was the most kind of defiant almost. There was a big statement made when it needed to be made in the final. So whereas Keane Lynch was just this really, it wasn't even consistent graph. It was just raising and raising the whole way throughout the season. Whereas Henry, I remember bits of 12. It was really that drawn All-Ireland final performance where he literally just pulled them up from the ashes. I don't remember much of that the rest of that 2012 season. As you said,
I remember I'm pretty sure he scored a goal in the Leinster final when they got hammered. Whoever they played in the semi-final, I can't remember who they played in the semi-final in Leinster that year. All-Ireland semi-final, I can't remember.
They played Limerick in an All-Ireland quarter-final, actually. That was when TJ had that conversation with him about potentially dropping off the squad, and then he ended up as an All-Star that year, I think.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember that Shefflin scored a goal, or maybe 2 in that game, but I feel like he wasn't moving brilliantly that day. Maybe he was on the back of an injury, because obviously, he went through a few seasons there where in the off-season he had very serious surgeries, whether it was his shoulders and his knees or whatever it was. Then semi-final against Tipperary, one thing I remember was him doing this beautiful long-range, must have been 15-yard hand pass over the top to put in Larkin or TJ Reid? I can't remember who, but it was fantastic. And then, like, first half of the game against Galway, Fergal Moore had him completely tied up. But then from the second half and then obviously the replay, he was really, really good. Tony Kelly, I actually thought Podge Collins was hurler of the year all the way up until the replay for the All-Ireland that year. Whereas Keane Lynch has looked hurler of the year basically all year this year. 2018, I don't think it was a done deal that he would be hurler of the year. Callan, was it a done deal with Callan 2 years ago? It was
goal in every game, and was just outstanding the whole way through. Yeah, in fairness,
Yeah.
I think that was kind of sewn up if he did a good final performance. It was never going to be. It didn't look like it was going to be anyone from Kilkenny to win hurler of the year. And in fairness, he was probably he was the best of the tip lads.
Yeah, I think Michael Verney was a very dominant hurler of the year in 2011 because after watching him in the first game, I put money down for him to win hurler of the year, and he went ahead.
That's the classic. That's the classic. If Tip lose, I'm going to have a little saver here to try and save face. Funny you should say it about the 2013 hurler of the year. Brian Murphy from Cork decided the hurler of the year that year. He marked Tony Kelly the first day and kept him quiet, and Podge went to town, and then he marked Podge in the replay and kept him quiet, and Tony didn't go to town, but he was better than he was the first day. So no more than Tom Morrissey taking it off, probably Tom Morrissey taking it off Tom Morrissey last year. Brian Murphy probably took it off Podge in 2013.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think who would have had the most dominant season there. I'd say it's probably between like Larry Corbett. I don't think that was I actually thought Brendan Maher was hurler of the year that year. He won the young hurler of the year. You'll say, of course you'd say that because he's from Borrislee, but I did genuinely think he was. But Larry obviously got the hat-trick, and then he'd scored against Limerick as well. Done a nice bit of scoring that day, even though don't think he was on the ball that much, but when he was putting in the back of the net.
7 touches, I think, that day. Yeah,
that was it, wasn't it? It was something mad like that. Yeah, so I'd probably put it up between Michael Verney in 2011, Callan in 19, of course, and Keane Lynch in 21.
I think that's fair enough because they're the most unanimous hurlers of the year that I can remember in within that time. Like, it's not even up for debate who wins hurler of the year this year. It probably was it was up for debate a bit in 11 and a bit in 19. It could well be the most dominant hurler of the year in the last 10 to 11 years.
And the players who vote, they'll be a disgrace if they don't get it, won't they?
Well, imagine there was some sort of, Sean Finn and Kyle Hayes going lobbying for votes around their Limerick panel and lads they went to college with from other counties and this kind of crack.
Right, plenty of comments in. Good morning, lads, says Flash. Did we miss him on Monday? How are we, lads, says Grode Howley. We're flying it, top of the turf. Will, latest on Galway was Hanley turned it down, and County Board is talking to Davy. We're going to talk about that in a little while because my sources, and maybe yours too, Michael, are saying that Micheál Donoghue might still be in the mix. And that was very specifically why I did an article on it a couple of weeks ago. I wrote the talks broke down, and we'll see if it can be revived. Grode Howley is adding that comment in too. Flash, Sean Finn getting his well-deserved respect. Would have had Morrissey and Flanagan ahead of him, though, like Verney. Let's see any other comments in here at the moment. There's plenty coming in here. Ross Hegarty, I think the 2012 Leinster Championship, didn't Shefflin force a draw against Galway after Galway being about 9 or 10 ahead in the second half in Tullamore? I think that was actually 2014.
Yeah, 14.
Paddy in 16 for me. Noel McGrath 2019. Anyone man of the match in semi-final and final.
Yeah, and Brendan Maher wouldn't have been too far off in 19 as well, I'd say. He did all the man-marking performances that year, didn't he? Funny, Shane, I was actually having a conversation with Joe Bergen, used to hurl Offaly about this, and met him in the petrol station the other day, and I was just saying, Jesus, it's not hard when you get a bit older. And he was just saying, he actually pointed back to, I said to him something I said on the show before about when you're 31 or 32, you're nearly in your prime. And he said, yeah, and you go another year or two and you're not. And he just said about Shefflin actually been hurler of the year in 2012. I mean, on top of his game, picked up a couple of injuries, got sent off in 13 and was sub in 14 and then was retired. Do you know what I mean? Shefflin or Callan in 19, the best he's probably ever played. And obviously there's injury coming into this as well, but probably quiet in 20, quiet in 21. And you're probably looking at maybe max 1 to 2 more seasons left with Tipperary. So there's kind of like a tipping point there at a certain age as well.
Yeah, definitely. ML89, all this chat of Munster as if Limerick aren't cakewalking through it. The other 4 are very close, no more than Offaly until about 2014. Wexford, Dublin and Galway were in Leinster during the Cats' reign. Do you believe that?
There's a fair point in the sense of it's almost like Leinster without Dublin. It's very, very competitive. That's football I'm talking about. Most teams could beat other teams in a given day. You're probably still favouring Meath and Kildare, but a lot of the other teams would fancy their chances. Same in Munster. Clara would fancy beating Cork. They'd fancy beating Waterford. and they'd fancy beating Tipperary. No more than any of those other counties would. Would any of them fancy beating Limerick? Probably not. And recent history would suggest that they'd be right. that they'd be right to think that that's going to be by far the toughest of them all. So there could be a point in that. Like I look at it this way, and we talked about it earlier. Limerick are clearly one. Then it's a coin toss essentially for 2, 3, 4, and 5, even if they are all in Munster.
But like when I'm talking about Leinster back in that era, I know there was the odd situation where Wexford beat Tipperary in 2007, and those sort of situations did happen. But right now, you and I have ranked the Munster teams number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in terms of the overall pecking order, and Leinster, all their teams are beneath that. So that wouldn't have been the case that it was like Leinster 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 back then, and then all the Munster teams were rated beneath that. No. The Munster teams were at a higher standing there, but so that would kind of be the point there. And I'm trying to think: have Limerick battered teams in Munster the last few years? They have to some degree. I mean, they've beaten Tipperary a couple of times pretty comprehensively by double-digit scores. It was in 2019. I think it was 9 in 2020, wasn't it? In the depths of winter. And Pat Ryan got a goal right at the end, and it made the scoreline look quite poor. But I'm not saying that Limerick didn't dominate the game. They did. Didn't they beat Clare by 9 points last year? Beat Tip by 5 points.
Waterford by 4, and then 11 in the final.
Yeah, they are dominating. Definitely dominating, obviously, because they're continuing to win it. But I don't think they're winning it by the sort of beat-down scorelines that Kilkenny would have been winning games by back in the mid-noughties, no?
No, and the games probably aren't over after half an hour like they invariably were when Kilkenny, to be honest, when Kilkenny played us and when Kilkenny played Wexford, you knew the result at a half-time generally. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll jump on to the young hurler of the year conversation. It's would you call this a tasty lineup, or? I mean, the three guys going for it anyway are Aidan McCarthy, Shane Barrett, and Brian Cody. Sorry, Owen Cody. Brian Cody is not going for it and hasn't been going for it for about 40 or 50
They
years.
could give it to him yet, you just don't know.
Yeah, well, look, if he's one man in a match in an All-Ireland final, why wouldn't he? But
it's some achievement. Brian Cody's greatest achievement, if he's a bit of a sneer, won a man in a match in an All-Ireland final I didn't play in. Do you know what I mean?
So Owen Cody, he's only after turning 21 there a month ago, and he's already won the Young Hurler of the Year. Not too many are winning that a couple of times. They're not like Owen Kelly won it in 2001 and 2002. And I'm just looking through the record books there to see did anyone else win it a couple of times. Maybe I'm missing it there, but I'm not seeing anyone
Dermot O'Connor with the football is the only one I can think of a young footballer hurler deer that won it back to back. And I definitely have to have Owen Cody down as the favourite. Saw a bit of kind of debate online, and there might have been some parochialism. I see Derek Lynch was tweeting about Aidan McCarthy, and Aidan McCarthy was brilliant this year, and we've probably both kind of pled his case over the last couple of years, and we both think he's going to be very, very good. But like, I put it this way, Owen Cody's the only one nominated on the All-Star 45, and he's not a million miles away from the starting 15. The other two, Shane Barrett couldn't get his game with Cork.
Started the semi-final, all right, and then it didn't really go his way.
Yeah, with due respect to him, he didn't start the All-Ireland final, and he was good off the bench, all right. Aidan McCarthy obviously is a starter for Clare and was very, very good at different stages, particularly in the league, actually. He was very, very good in the league.
Has a good slide tackle in him as well.
Out closer to the Ennis Road than the goal. But to me, Owen Cody definitely looks the obvious candidate, and I'd be shocked if anyone other than Owen Cody won it.
Yeah, I do think the other two guys are seriously talented, but I'm like yourself, Owen Cody in a couple of those games, he was just so dangerous. Even from the get-go against Wexford, didn't he catch the first 2 or 3 balls going in, and Wexford were all at sea and had to make a change almost right away. And it's not everyone that should be doing that for. You're making those sort of plans when the likes of TJ Reid is in there. Not, you don't expect that it's going to be the 20-year-old. And that's 2 seasons in a row that he's delivering. Like, we're not waiting for Owen Cody to come along anymore. He's arrived.
No, the thing about him as well is at stages of 2020, he was very good, but he probably struggled at a couple of the key moments, particularly against Waterford when they were beaten in the All-Ireland semi-final. But when he's coming back a year later and making statements and showing that he's physically developed and he's mentally developed as well, like I think that's hugely exciting for Kilkenny folk over the next decade. If he's like really making a mark at 21, having had some of having dealt with adversity already. I think that's hugely exciting for them going forward. And with Adrian Mullen coming back to fitness, those two probably in particular, and maybe John Donnelly, Kilkenny folk will be hoping that they offset probably the loss of TJ over the next couple of years.
Liam Ryan is going in heavy here. Bunch of young hurlers out of 3 poor teams. Are these 3? They're 3 brilliant hurlers, but are they 3 poor teams? Are we saying Clare are poor, Cork are poor, and Kilkenny are poor? Are we ruling? Would you rule Cork out of the All Ireland next year on the basis of how badly they were beaten in that final? And are we re-evaluating everything they did and their run of beating Clare, Dublin, and Kilkenny by saying, well, do you know what? It wasn't like Cork got to the All Ireland final, but all of those teams are well off the mark. And I mean, all of those 3 teams are are where these players are from.
The form lines, I would say the form lines of the 3 Young Hurler of the Year nominees, I would say, are on the wrong side of the championship. I think the form lines are through Limerick and Waterford, in my opinion. Obviously, you'd say Clare beat Waterford, but Waterford went on a run then after. Clare were beaten in the qualifiers. Cork didn't beat, they didn't beat a Tip, they didn't beat a Waterford, they didn't beat a Limerick, would say, to get to where they got to. So you have to question that. And I have said it to you before, I do think there'll be scars from that All-Ireland final defeat. I just don't see how there's not going to be, particularly for young players. They'll be thinking an awful lot about that over the winter. They'll be getting comments here and there for different people. You just don't know how that seeps into your consciousness. They will overcome that in time. Will that be next year? I'd be doubtful of whether it'd be next year. It could be 2 years by the time they've physically and probably mentally matured to get to that position where they can win a senior All-Ireland.
Yeah, like Kilkenny have a great chance of being back in an All-Ireland semi-final next year. They have a great chance. They always do pretty well in the league. So, will they be back playing like for silverware next year in both Leinster and in the league? And then, assuming that they win Leinster, as they have done the past couple of years, they're only 1 game away from an All-Ireland. And being in an All-Ireland semi-final is a great stage. So the last few years, Owen Cody has had that stage and he has delivered. And Will puts in a good question here. Is Owen Cody the first young Kilkenny player in a while that would have made the noughties Kilkenny team? It's hard to know would he have made it at 20. If the likes of TJ Reid and Richie Hogan were kind of probably in and out of the team, future hurlers of the year until probably their mid-20s, then might be tough for Owen Cody.
Just on a question from one of the viewers there, I think this is really a pertinent point. Limerick will not have anybody been nominated for the Young Hurler of the Year because they don't. It's the same as Kilkenny back in the day. They don't need to put somebody in at that age. They'll put them in when they're ready, not to see whether they sink or swim. Like Cathal O'Neill maybe could play more next year out of necessity with Peter Casey out and maybe with Barry Murphy out as well. Colin Coughlin could play more as well. But they don't need to throw players in the deep end. They're in that kind of luxurious position almost where they don't need to do that. And there's so many parallels between them and the Kilkenny team of the noughties. Same with like TJ and Richie Hogan were banging their head off a wall there for a while trying to get into that team. And some of these young Limerick guys could potentially be doing the same. And that's a great sign for them.
I wonder, is Adam English the most likely Limerick winner of Young Hurler of the Year? I think he was 17 when they were playing last year around December. I remember seeing him being named as 17. So maybe he's gone 18 at this point. Like, there's a fair chance he has. There's only so many months in a year, Mike.
Yeah.
So
it's really tricky.
Do you know,
as a journalist, when maybe you're writing an article about Adam English now and you see last December that he was 17, you can't find his date of birth and you can't find anyone to verify, and you're just thinking, will I take the chance that he's turned 18 within that time, or is it a possibility that he's a December baby or whatever? And you end up being wrong.
First world journalism problems.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Damage has been done to a young Cork team, says Patrick Coleman. Yeah, interesting. Who are the number 2 and 3 teams in the country? I'm trying to remember when we did the hurling power rankings. Obviously, Limerick were 1. Did we go Waterford 2? Did we go Tipperary 3?
Yeah, I went with Tipperary 3. And my basis for going with Tipperary 3 would be that they were the only team that served it up to Limerick.
Yeah.
The only team. And the only team that had Limerick in trouble.
Also, there's plenty of playing talent there. And even if you want to say 1 or 2 more might retire. And interestingly, Brendan Maher is the only one that has retired. And I don't know if Colin Bonner would have met up with any players yet. I don't know if, and it's hard to imagine he would, because it's in the thick of it with the club there at the moment. And, I would imagine he wouldn't want to put any noses out of joint in clubs at the moment by pulling players away for an evening and distracting them away from what they're doing in the club. But maybe no conversations have happened yet with older players. But even so, if Tipperary lost 2 or 3 more players through retirement, you still probably got 8 or 9, maybe 10 lads who have won an All-Ireland on the field of play. And then a lot of players that are ready to be blooded or ready to, that are physically ready now, maybe 21, 22. So that's another reason why you would have Tip there, even if things might very well change next year. Fred91 says, Michael drinking tea from a bucket.
No, I'm drinking water from, it's as good as a bucket, yeah. My bottle's out in the car and I didn't have time to go out and get it. So I found the biggest cup available, an absolute monster of a York.
A Mike Ashley cup, Sports Direct.
Yeah. Maybe I'll have to sell off this cup like he's potentially going to sell off Newcastle.
Yeah, I was actually watching something earlier about the Saudis taking over Newcastle and the fact that they had to settle for, I think it was like €1 billion or pounds or whatever to that BN Sports company, because the Saudis were basically ripping off getting in the Premier League coverage. So this was sort of compensation. And I'm wondering, there's certain money men who back counties and teams in all sports, obviously. And I just wonder, if how unscrupulous would the background of the benefactor have to be for you to say, I don't want them involved in our county? I don't care if it means winning All Irelands and having the best of everything.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it?
If the Saudis came in and said, we're backing Offaly and we're going all the way, we're going to the moon.
Imagine you had maybe some ex-county players out teaching over in Dubai or somewhere like that, and they ended up meeting up with some sort of a sheikh or something one night, and they said, listen, or maybe they fell in love with the daughter of someone, and they like, what's your big passion? Offaly GAA. How much do you want?
Lowry, you're out. Saudis are in. But anyway, that's just a bit of crack. So otherwise, looking at the nominations, I've mentioned Paddy Purcell already. Not Paddy Purcell. Paddy Purcell's in there and very, very well merited. I wonder, would any other Laois guys be in the conversation there? 1 or 2 lads played pretty well. I thought Ross King did well at times. Thought Jack Kelly had a couple of good performances. Obviously, they got the job done against Antrim when it mattered, and they performed really well against Waterford in that qualifier, where nobody, including ourselves, gave them a chance. Paddy Smith's the other guy I think could have had a nod in here.
Yeah, definitely. And I think looking at the midfielders is interesting. Chatting to a couple of people that were on the selection committee, Tony Kelly has put down midfield. Now, they're saying that the positions are flexible.
It's a disgrace.
Midfielders and attackers will be somewhat interchangeable, but
they're not.
But in the selection committee's view, it is. So Tony Kelly didn't play in midfield this year, but there's a distinct possibility that he'd be selected at midfield.
It's a disgrace.
Disgrace, Bill, disgrace. But that's listen, it's a tricky one, and I think the ones to lose out there probably. Yeah, there's 3 players in with a really good shout there. You would have said Jamie Barron, Cottle Malone and Darragh O'Donovan, but I think they're all likely to lose out to Tony Kelly. To me, it definitely looks like Tony Kelly and Will O'Donoghue would be the midfield partnership based on what's there. A word on Paddy Purcell. Pat Critchley is obviously Laois's only All-Star, so it is a big deal, particularly for counties that are just below the top tier. It is a big deal to get nominated, and I know sometimes nominations are forgotten. For someone like a Keane Lynch or TJ Reid or something like that, a nomination might be forgotten. But for someone like Paddy Purcell, it's huge. Huge for him. It's huge for everyone that's coaching the whole way up. It's everyone in Rathdowney Earl. It's a really big deal. And that's probably what people should be talking about. That he's probably definitely one of the people that people should be talking about today, because it mightn't mean as much to counties that are winning, but I'd say that'll mean a hell of a lot to him. So
I also see Paddy Purcell this year. When I watched him play, I saw him as a wing forward, and he did wear number 10. Got a couple of goals that day against Antrim, if I remember correctly. So that's 2 guys who were forwards playing midfield. And then I'm starting to ask myself, well, where are the midfield nominations? And like Will O'Donoghue and Darragh O'Donovan, Colin Malone is out there, even though I think he was kind of shoved a bit forward at times as well.
Yeah, he's wing forward a good bit, yeah.
And I'm wondering, where's Luke Meade?
Yeah, fair point, yeah. No, that's a fair point, definitely, yeah. And even Conor Cahalane, to a lesser extent, who would have been out midfield an awful lot. Like we were debating Luke Meade for our team of the year, yeah. No, I didn't think he was team of the year, but was he within the 45? I would have definitely said so. The problem, Shane, here is a lot of the time is that there's always a surplus of forwards. It's always really easy to find forwards. It's like, I'll put it this way, if you're doing a match report, it's so much easier to rate a forward than to rate a back because it's so much more visible and it's so much easier to see what a forward is doing because it's closer to the goal. Your attention is almost closer to it. So it's always easier to find the forwards. It's always more difficult to find the midfielders and even more difficult to find the defenders because it's, I don't like using the word, but it's much more kind of nuanced, isn't it? You have to be looking particularly deep at it to find a cornerback that's going around spoiling lads and doing brilliantly, even though it's not maybe the most pleasing thing on the eye.
And like, you know yourself, sometimes, like you, I think a bit like myself, would have often been given roles when you're playing hurling matches. Go out there and stop that lad. So you might be told, don't even go looking for the ball at all. I don't want to see you on it. I just want to see you stuck to your man like SH1T on a blanket. And you go out and you do the job. And after the match, the manager, he's delighted with you because maybe you shut down that guy. And there's probably lads here who aren't getting that credit. You know, the lads that are the full-on stoppers. And the most obvious one that comes to mind to me is someone like Conor Gleeson. Remember when he was very good at doing that in 2017, Brendan Maher in 2019. There are loads of examples of that, and get your comments in and let me know.
Lee Keegan is probably the best. I read in it. I think Frank Roach did actually talk to people, players that had marked Lee Keegan that he'd went man to man with, and they just said his ability to forget about everything that's going on and just concentrate on you. They'd never seen, like Enda Smith, I think it was actually quoted as saying that. But he's a Rolls Royce in the sense that he can do that, but yet he can still impact the game going forward. Like that's phenomenal, really. You don't do that nearly as much in hurling.
So we won't be ever including those guys really in the All-Star selections. You know, I actually, Brendan did get it in 2019, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and that was just because of the quality of personnel that he had shut down, I suppose.
Yeah, but I suppose the other thing is, like, you're talking about when you rate players after a game, you might be like, but sure, he never touched the ball. How can I give him anything over a 6 or
I'd be like, he never touched the ball. His man never touched the ball. I'd give him an 8.
Yeah, well, I mean, but that is the point that, there are times when if your full role, if your kind of job description was do this and your man doesn't score or touch the ball much, I mean, you've probably had a 10 out of 10 performance, really, haven't you?
That's why I love chatting to managers after a game. And some managers will talk drivel after a game, but just say...
like us here.
Yeah, well, maybe. I remember, like, just say Kildare beat Mayo in the Newbridge and O'Hare game, and all we're talking about is probably was a Paul Cribben and Dermot O'Connor, and then Keane O'Neill comes in and starts talking about Mick O'Grady. Mick O'Grady, cornerback, who you mightn't have seen much of, but you didn't see anything of Andy Moran or whoever he was marking. But we're not. They have picked that matchup and they've put so much emphasis on that matchup, whereas we don't see that. And when the cornerback or the fullback ties down one of their better players, that's why it's good to talk to somebody within the setup. You'll say, oh, such and such kicked 4 points. Yeah, but what about your man who never gave the other lad a sniff, like, you know? And I think it's those jobs definitely need to be appreciated a bit more.
Yeah, and do we think Limerick are going to get that record number of All-Stars? First off, just to say the breakdown is Limerick got 15 nominations, so every outfield player got nominated. Cork got 9, Waterford 7, Kilkenny 5, 3 each for Clare and Tip, and 1 apiece for Dublin, Laois and Wexford.
There's a few tipping points here. There are a couple of really close calls. So, like Nicky Quaid and Noah Murphy is a close call. But as I said to you, when we picked our team, I do think the selection committee will be looking to get other players in there where they can, because there's so many instances where they can't get anybody else in. Like, I put it this way, Sean Finn is in. I think Barry Nash is in. Hayes is in. Hannon's probably in. Will O'Donoghue's definitely in. Morrissey, Casey, Flanagan are all in. Lynch is in. There's 8 or 9 easy. Garrod Hegarty's probably a 50-50. Nicky Quaid's probably a 50-50. Dermot Burns is probably a 50-50. And maybe more than a 50-50. And Darragh O'Donovan's not far off either.
Yeah, I think 50-50 is probably going to go against a Limerick lad here because of optics.
Yeah, I still think they could get 10 though.
And what's the record again? Is
9. I think Kilkenny Hurlers had it in 83, 2000, 2008. Kerry footballers had it in maybe 81. The Dubs had it twice, I think. So, like, there's a lot of history on the line here. It would be a big deal. It would show you just how dominant they would be if they did break that 9. And the fact that they have the 3 nominations for Hurler of the Year is a fair statement in itself too.
That kind of says it all. Mike Sinnott, boys, we as Wexford played Clare in Thurles this year. We were coming from a hangover against the Cats. Take out Tony Kelly, I feel Clare beat us with an average enough team. So I presume that's, Mike, you're more or less saying that Wexford have a very, very poor team.
Mike, are you slating your own lads?
Are you saying that Lee Chin didn't deserve a nomination for an All-Star here? I'm actually wondering, is that the territory you're moving into?
It could well be, yeah, could well be. I think that's an interesting one. Like, Danny Sutcliffe was the only Dublin All-Star. I do think Alan Nolan was hard done by in goals, I have to say.
And Paddy Smith.
Yeah, Patrick Collins' save from Tony Kelly probably got him in there. But I think Alan Nolan was brilliant throughout, I have to say, particularly against Galway at the start. And Donald Burke is very unlucky in the forward line. I probably maybe would have had Donald Burke in ahead of Sutcliffe, if I'm honest. Sutcliffe was brilliant at different stages, but he was also tied down. He was tied down well by Ger Mellerick for long spells. James Matter definitely got the better of him now at the end of the Leinster final. But that might have been to do with the fact that he had an extra load to carry because Ronan Hayes and a couple of others were missing. But yeah, I do think Donald Burke deserved to be in there too. And looking at that forward line, Shane, I do have to say, and you know my feelings on TJ Reid. I think he's one of the greatest hurlers of all time. But I have to say, I think he's very lucky to have gotten a nomination this year. If you take the Leinster semi-final against Wexford out of it, where I think he hit Matt O'Hanlon for 4 from play.
Yeah, and O'Hanlon had done well during normal time as well. Yeah. But TJ did kind of do better as the game went on. But yeah, Paddy Smith won the duel. And as I said, Dublin were very weak in that day, but Paddy Smith definitely spoiled him really well. Then also against Cork, he did a couple of nice things, no doubt about it. But Rob Downey certainly won that duel as we were going into extra time and caught ball over him and burst out ahead of him and stuff like that. So I think, is that a case of trying to get a few extra Kilkenny names in there too? They did win the Leinster title, so you'd be expecting them to get a few and went to extra time in the semi. Yeah,
maybe so. I have to say, I do think probably Conor Whelan is probably unlucky not to get a nomination as well. If we're taking league form into this, they were dismal in the championship, but he was by far their best performer, definitely up front anyway.
Well, then you'd be saying Cathal Mannion too, but the championship didn't work out for anyone from Galway, really.
Yeah, it worked out more for Whelan, in fairness. I thought he was the one that kept going when things were particularly poor. Was he better than Lee Chin this year? I probably would have said he was, if I'm honest with you. So I probably think there could have been a greater spread. I think this is the first year since 2013 that Galway didn't have a nomination, which really shows you how bad it is. And we'll go into the Galway situation a bit more. They're bordering on going back to where they were around that time, and even before Anthony Cunningham took over, if they don't get the right kind of personnel in place going forward.
Yeah, I have to say I was glad to see Jason Ford get the nomination.
Yeah.
Those 6 points he scored in the first half alone against Limerick were sensational. Grode Howley brings up a good one here with Diarmuid Ryan. I think he's a player that has been quite good this season. Adrian Mullen, he also mentions, and Luke Meade, hard done by. A couple of more comments in here from ML89. I thought Pádraig Walsh was a shocking omission. Conor Whelan, John Conlon and Alan Nolan unlucky. Diarmuid Ryan and Aidan McCarthy. Is Aidan McCarthy hard done by?
I thought he was brilliant throughout the league. I didn't think he was as good in the championship. I thought if there was going to be another Clare defence, not Ed McCarthy probably played forwards and was back at times, but if there was going to be another Clare player in there, would have probably John Conlon or Diarmuid Ryan probably would have been ahead. Probably I think John Conlon's very unlucky, I have to say. I think Conlon was man of the match against Waterford, wasn't he?
I think so. Yeah, he was. Yeah. He was very good that day. Grode Howley says Conor clearly went under the radar a bit this year.
Well, he's a classic case of a spoiler that he's not going to clear the ball 100 yards.
Tom Morrissey vibe. That he's
kind of, yeah. Even though, your tweet in the All-Ireland final summed it up to me about Tom Morrissey and how he's underappreciated. It was kind of like, Tom Morrissey's going to have a quiet game and score 5 points again. That's just that's the way it is. He scored 3. But, yeah, there's definitely Clare. See, the thing is, Clare were beaten in the qualifiers. That's probably why they're not represented. I'm sure the selection committee think, okay, Kilkenny are Leinster champions. They were beaten after extra time in an All-Ireland semi-final. They have to be fairly represented. But I'm not so much like that. I have no problem putting Conor Whelan in there. even if Galway were beating their 2 championship matches, I had no problem putting John Conlon in if it was at the expense of a Kilkenny player, and it was Clare 4, Kilkenny 4.
A comment in here from Andrew Sullivan begs a question. Now, he's saying that the back hasn't won Hurler of the Year since Tommy Walsh in 2009. Don't I remember it well being there at the All-Ireland final? He had the ball in his hand when the final whistle went and went off on a Christy Ring sort of an excited run, and who could blame him? No back has won it since then. I think maybe, like, if you were to really put a gun to my head, I would have said Paddy Maher would have deserved the Hurler of the Year in 2016. So I think he was hard done by there. Pádraig Mannion, I would have said 2017, if you weren't picking Jamie Barron, actually. And other than that, do you feel that a back is due one? I mean, it won't be down to who's due one. It will be Keane Lynch. But does that stand out to you that a back hasn't won it?
Yeah, it's just, I think it's what we were talking about earlier. Unless you do something like what Kyle Hayes does, you're not going to shoot the lights out. You're not going to grab as many eyes as Keane Lynch ducking and diving and weaving and putting balls over the bar and flicking balls here or there. It is a less fashionable job. And you're not going to, like, when does a back grab the headlines? Apart from Hayes' goal in the Munster final, like, backs generally don't grab the headlines. It's all about what's done on the scoreboard. Like, you're looking at before Tommy Walsh, I was going back, Brian Whelan won it twice. Once was probably on the back of his forward display in the All-Ireland final as well. So it is much more difficult as a defender to win it. That's why it is probably Sean Finn, I would say, has gotten what I would call a legacy nomination for Hurler of the Year. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, body of work.
And that's the same as, like, no disrespect, I think Joe Canning got a legacy Hurler of the Year in 2017. I think he was Hurler of the Year in 2018.
Do you know what I'm going to bring up now? I didn't prepare you for this one, but I just saw it on a GAA collection, something or other on Instagram, and I had to bring it up here. Look at some of these hairstyles from the 1978 Players of the Year. Like, they're not too dissimilar to some of what you'd be producing at times when you let the hair grow to smaller. But look there on the right. By the way, isn't it notable that this was sponsored by is that Carol's Ham or Carol's Cigarettes?
No, I think it's Carol's Cigarettes, to the best of my knowledge. Yeah,
you wouldn't be having that these days. But do you see there, John Horgan with Cork? That hairstyle. Now, he won Hurler of the Year in 1978. But my God, that is a glorious hairstyle.
An absolute beauty. Yeah, I think it was the freelance journalist Kevin Egan tweeted that lockdown basically has helped produce all these unbelievable GAA haircuts. The likes of Cormac Egan and other guys that, you know, maybe just didn't bother getting their hair cut during the lockdown, or couldn't get their hair cut, or didn't want their mother or father or brother or sister chopping away. But there's definitely a lot of really interesting cuts in there. Like John Horgan's is classic, in fairness. Seamus Durac's a really interesting one, Shane. Seamus Durac won 3 All-Stars without playing a championship match in Croke Park.
Which
is phenomenal.
But Clare were a very, would you say, unlucky team, or a team that were nearly men at that particular stage? They were coming up against great teams. Yeah,
probably nearly men. It's funny, I actually interviewed the first All-Star, Damien Martin, last week for a piece in Independent over the next while, and I had some great yarns about, like, even the selection process back then, and there was different prizes for player of the tournament when they went out there. But he ended up getting an All-Star, even though Offaly didn't win a championship game in 71. Like, Offaly were in the doldrums in 71, and he always says to Pat Hartigan, he said, like, it's gas. I got 1 All-Star in my Offaly career, and it's all it's ever talked about, and it's a trivia question. And Pat Hartigan won 3 or 4 of them, a full-back, and he's never hardly talked about at all.
Any other hairstyles standing out there? Do you know, actually, I was just thinking.
Jimmy Keaveney's the spit of Colin Meaney. Pull that back up. He's the absolute spit of Colin Meaney there in the football selection.
Pat Spillane won Footballer of the Year that year. Jimmy Barry Murphy, he looks like a Beatle, doesn't he?
Yeah,
like
he does, in fairness. Yeah.
Jeez, like, that's unbelievable stuff.
I'll never forget, Shane, it was that Jimmy Barry was inducted into the Croke Park Hall of Fame a few years ago, and Derek Foley was there from the start. Derek's a great character.
I used to work with him,
Yeah, he'd throw his hand to anything, but he'd always be looking outside the box. And I remember him throwing a question at Jimmy Barry Murphy, like directly to Jimmy, basically comparing Jimmy to George Best. And I've never seen, like, Jimmy, just an unbelievably humble man, just kind of totally kind of clammed up. And then I think he mentioned, like, Ringo Starr and all these people that were really popular at the time. It was comical, but Jimmy was some player, and he was an absolute style icon as well.
Yeah. That wouldn't be unlike Derek Foley at all. He does like to throw in and out sidewinder here and there. Is there anything else we have to talk about on the All-Stars, or have we kind of touched on everything there?
No, I think we're not too bad. I think, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I did think that this was interesting that Limerick have advertised for an S&C coach, and they've done it online. So I'm just going to bring it up on screen here and kind of run through it. Right, so Limerick vacancy for lead strength and conditioning coach, because Mike Kiley, he's now involved with Ulster, but they've obviously gone through all the details here and their whole summary. So I just want to look at this in terms of, like, number one, the fact that they're happy enough to advertise it, and rather than being really insular and just trying to find someone that they already know of, that they're willing to put it out there and just see, right, well, who else is out there? Maybe we don't just pick someone locally, or someone that, maybe the previous S&C coach knows, or somebody that they've heard of previously. They're putting it out there, and I think that's a good thing for counties and clubs to do, to sort of look everywhere to get the most expertise possible. Just to go through the summary, the role will involve leading the development and management of the strength and conditioning programme. Candidate will be a vital part of a multidisciplinary group creating a high-performance training environment. Yeah, that's all sort of stuff you'd expect. But then just even look into the key responsibilities that you'd have if you were the S&C lead. In conjunction with the team management, set out an agreed programme for the senior hurling panel, work with the medical team to ensure injury prevention and manage team loadings, develop and manage programmes for prehab and rehab, manage day-to-day athlete monitoring strategies that include various sports technologies, i.e. GPS, etc. Work with the team sports nutritionist to design meal requirements associated with team training, travel, and any other dietary needs. Develop and execute nutritional plans designed specifically for individual players to enhance on-field performance. Ensure a safe and functional training environment for the weight room and other conditioning facilities. So then obviously it goes through the different qualifications, then including over 2 years experience working as a lead strength and conditioning coach in a team sport setting, first aid qualifications, degree, and S&C sort of qualifications there. It's fairly specific and yet vague at the same time, but I do think it's a good idea for a county to just be like, we're not just going to go local, let's just throw this out everywhere and see. You just never know what expert will have come back into the country. And I'll give an example. Is it Andre Quinn is the name of the guy that's back in Cavan, leading up their S&C, having been involved with London Irish for a couple of years. And, he would have worked with some top rugby players there.
Yeah, there's some, I know that you might think some of it is a bit vague, but there's some level of detail involved in that. There really, really is. That's kind of never ending. It's, developing individual programs for different guys, then obviously developing programs for injured guys, developing prehab for all these different guys that have had maybe legacy problems coming into it. It also looks like involved, like, working with a lot of other people in training them up. Even it was good to see the defibrillation and first aid and all that mentioned. It's kind of a one-stop kind of a job, I suppose, and it would be their responsibility, I'd imagine, to help upskill a lot of other people and make sure that they have a lot of people qualified in different areas. But it shows the amount of work involved in a county setup now. Like, I put it to you this way, like 10 years ago, and obviously, no manager is paid or no one's paid or anything like that. But 10 years ago, the head man was the only one that was, been remunerated in any way. Now you're looking at full-time secretaries within county boards. You're looking at full-time S&C. I think Lucas Curdenstein is employed by Galway GAA to deal with all of their teams. I think definitely all the hurling side of things anyway, underage, senior, and the whole way down through underage. So there are so many more people employed by county boards now, and I think they realise as well, and it's probably very good for Limerick to realise that this is something that they can really go after. They've gone after. Imagine to say, Limerick would look like they're ahead of most counties S&C wise with what they've done, and now it looks like they're looking to get to another level almost, which is very encouraging if you're from Limerick, and if you're a young player coming up, you're coming into a professional environment in an amateur setting.
And while I would look at this as being very progressive, then we were talking about something that in Limerick that's not quite as progressive, which is the situation with Monaleen and Father Casey's in the minor, and the fact that they played each other in the group, but rather than the head-to-head counting in terms of who was the top seed and who was second seed, they instead had an old draw. Let's have a look at that draw.
Okay, we're here to do the draw to see who tops the Division 1 football under 17 Father Casey's and Mornaleen, and as the first team out will be top in the group, and the second team out will be runners up. So the first team out, Mornaleen. Just to confirm, second team out, Father Casey's. So Mornaleen will top the group, Father Casey's are runners up.
Wouldn't have got that back of the envelope cheap, would they?
Oh, it is. Apart from being on the back of a cigarette packet, I don't know if that could have been much worse than it was. Like, that's a really, if that's totally legit, which I believe it is, it's a really pathetic scenario, really. Like, you know, do it on a table with white pieces of paper where the camera is pointing directly in front, and there's so many things wrong with that. I'm assured that is 100% legitimate.
Yeah, let us know what you think of that, people. The words of Con Kilpatrick this week, really.
Can I just say, sorry, Shane, just come back for a second. Hasn't the pandemic brought out some of the worst, like, draw moments in county history over the last 18 months? Because they've all had to be done. Like on Facebook Live or whatever, and they're all there for people to see forever. And there's been some, like, there was the one in Wicklow where there was definitely funny business with a hand in a bowl, and like, it's just things going under the table, and it's just so much kind of shenanigans. The
Connacht draw looked a little bit funny too.
Yeah, there's so many different things that have been showing up for potentially what they were over the last while, just because they've had to be, publicized, or they've not publicized, they've had to be televised or whatever, and it's just it's very, very poor and totally disrespectful to the clubs and the teams and all the players involved. Yeah,
surely we can do a little bit better than that. But then again, the lads who have to do it, they're probably like, oh God almighty, we've better things to be doing than drawing out this minor team thing here. Like, obviously for the minor players and their parents and their families and stuff, it's really important. But like, and I'm not saying those guys, I'm just saying in general, you can imagine certain people when they have to make these draws, they'd be like, God almighty, how can we get this done quick?
Yeah. Fair enough, but geez, there's certain standards that you have to hold yourself to. The players hold themselves short of very high standards, as their management do. They deserve the one that the fixture makers and the people running the competitions to hold themselves to those standards as well. It's not a very good look for Limerick GAA.
Do you want to read out some of the quotes that Con Kilpatrick had this week when he was talking on Claire Byrne Live about his gambling issues?
Yeah, this was obviously very, very thought-provoking, and the first thing I'd say about Con for raising his story here, it's, he's doing a lot of people a lot of good here, and doing a really good service, I think, to a lot of people for an All-Ireland winner who has the world at his feet to highlight the problems that were going on behind the scenes. I think there's a lot of people that will gain an awful lot benefit from it, but just obviously everybody, probably Con Kilpatrick was the one who caught that ball for Conor McKenna's run to end up in McCurry's goal, and then he comes out with some really thought-provoking stuff about his gambling issues. He just said, I maybe started about 15 or 16 doing a wee bet with my father and my brother on a Saturday, just for a bit of crack and for a bit of banter. Then as I grew older, it kind of became more apparent. I was going into the bookies more. I had a few online accounts. I just seemed to find myself in the bookies quite a lot, doing quite more than what had just started off as a wee fiver bet that was quite innocent. That's how it started off, and it gradually got worse. He just says about things coming to a head in February 2018 when a group of his friends stepped in. He said, I think people had an inkling, because obviously if I was in the bookies quite a lot with the football, people would have been talking, saying, did you see him? Or he's coming in quite regularly. Then in 2018, it kind of all came out. I just borrowed too much money, stole that much money, that it all caught up with me. I was maybe saying that I needed to pay the car payment, or was going on holidays and was short, and I needed a bit more. To be honest, I could come up with a lie as quick as I could do anything. And he just talks about the crazy kind of scenarios and different things he did to get money. And I think fair play to him for highlighting this, because gambling issues are absolutely rampant all over Ireland, but particularly in GAA clubs. It's like anything, right? I'd be heavily involved in racing, and you'd know of a lot of stables that would be having, bets on horses within that stable, because, technically, like, they're seeing a horse work in the morning and they have inside information. And it's the same for if you're part of a club setup, or just say we played Coola and a practice match last weekend. And I'd be like, "Jeez, Cooler going well. I think they'll win Dublin or whatever." You use them, whatever. And then it happens within counties where maybe you start putting money on club matches that you're involved in, which I think is illegal at the moment, and club matches maybe that are going on around you as well. And all of a sudden, like, you were there to play hurling and, you know, enjoy a sport that you love, and then all of a sudden you're just totally captivated by, you know, will they cover the handicap? You know, will they be leading at half time and be leading at full time? And it is a big issue in clubs all around the country. Like, I remember doing a piece on it for the Indo about 4 or 5 years ago, talking to different lads. In fairness, it's hard for people to go on the record about it, but talked to one fella who had a bet on, he was playing in a double header, the second part of a double header in a ground, and he had a bet on the first game, and everyone was togged out in the dressing room and whatever. He said he was standing in the toilet looking out a window that could see the pitch to see how his bet was going, to see how the game was going. I know lads that have been on their phones, looking down at their phones in the dressing room 5 to 10 minutes before going out of matches, looking at various apps to see, you know, how's their accumulator going, how's the horse day back going, how's the X, Y, and Z of a match going. And you've been in dressing rooms as well. There is a lot of talk in dressing rooms around, oh, such and such worth a bet, or who's in your accumulator this weekend, or whatever. And like, it's kind of harmless, and then all of a sudden it can build up and up, and the fiver accumulator on a Saturday turns into a fiver accumulator on a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and then it turns into, you know, a €20 bet every day, and then it turns into a €50 bet every day, and then it turns into hours spent in the bookies. And more worryingly, from a gambling point of view, like, Shane, if I have my phone, you don't know what I'm doing. If I have a broken arm and it's in a sling, you can see that. It's clear I have a problem. I have an injury here. If I'm betting and you can't see me betting, and I have accounts at Bet365 and Powers or whoever, you can't see what I'm doing. But like, I could be dying inside from losing X amount of money, and I mightn't have money to get food, and I mightn't have money to pay rent. It is a big problem. I have a massive issue with gambling companies in general. I think a lot of them promote themselves as a bit of crack and have built themselves up as media entities, which I think is an absolute farce. It's like, oh, it's funny. Did you see that ad that X, Y, and Z put out? Oh, it's hilarious. Yeah, but they're absolutely crippling families all over the country, and they almost make it out to be a joke, which I absolutely despise. And gambling is it's a scourge, and it's a big problem within the GAA, I have to say.
Yeah, and like, there are people who are able to enjoy a bet and not take it too far. And like, I would have done a bit over the years, but very little. It's never something that's held huge amount of interest for me. Like, I even did a last man standing with the American football there recently, and I was out after week 2. Actually, most of the lads were, to be fair, because it's so impossible to predict NFL. But you know, the talk is, do we want to go again? And I'm like, do you know what? I couldn't be bothered going again. But I know not everybody's able to do that. And I always think, and I might have said it before, but like, I was playing, I think, snooker with a friend of mine, and you know, often in snooker halls you'd have like, you know, gambling machines, all the different type of machines,
the pokies,
and the roulette tables and stuff like that. And I remember watching one day this guy, he was over, and it was probably one of those poker machines that had like the digital display, and you're just tapping the screen and all that kind of stuff. But I could see he just seemed visibly so agitated, and if his mind was so overworked. Now, you're talking about, you can't really see a physical symptom with gambling when it's a real issue. And I totally agree with you. But there was just something about this guy on this day that he just looked like his mind was overheating, and that like, he just so agitatedly hitting the screen, you know, tapping the screen and that kind of stuff. And I was like, I think that's actually what a gambling addiction looks like. That's the closest I could get to it. So as Porter has says here, slippery slope, Michael dead right, a scourge. The Football League in England have banned them as shirt sponsors, haven't they? I'm not entirely sure if they have, but I do know that if you look at the Premier League shirts, isn't it pretty much half of them are Asian betting companies?
Yeah, Shane, the sponsorship and advertisement is a big issue, and I understand various media organizations, like, you have to fill your advertising space with something. But if you look at, you know, during Cheltenham or something, like, you will see various bookmakers emblazoned everywhere, and it'll be like 30 seconds to the off, some sort of gambling company mentioned or whatever. And like, this, you know, this whole idea of, you know, identify when you have a problem, and responsible gaming is an absolute farce. And them even saying that is an even bigger farce. It's just like it's almost like we'll give you 99% of the message and we want you here, and then the 1% is oh, if you have a problem, go here. And I the duty of care. I tell you what, a big issue, because I would be involved in racing and I would see it a lot. The big issue I have with gambling companies is that if you're a loser, they will take you every day of the week. And a lot of the time, gambling companies are essentially a recirculation of dole money. If you are a winner, you are cut off straight away. They have no interest in you whatsoever. They have no interest in winners. They have no interest in risk. They just have an interest in handy money. And it's just not something... I'll put it this way. Name me another service industry where you can be refused a service for not doing anything wrong. If you own a pub, right, and I'm in your pub and I'm acting the maggot, you can kick me out, and that's fine. If I am signed up with a betting company and I win money, I haven't done anything wrong. You can't, and the problem is they won't necessarily deny you service, but your betting limit will be €2.50 or something like that, and maybe you've had 300 before that, because maybe there are some good gamblers out there. That's just an issue I have. I think it's a totally hypocritical industry, I have to say.
Yeah, but then you have to, like, they're playing on the addictive personalities that people have. Like, I would have an addictive personality for chocolate.
I knew you were going to say chocolate.
Look at this. Look at what I cleaned out there earlier. A full box of Haribo sweets after doing a workout yesterday, thinking I'm a great lad. But like, even looking at the video game industry. Now, I used to play video games a ridiculous amount when I was a young lad. Pro Evolution Soccer. I think it's actually now called eFootball. But anyway, I used to play that an awful lot. And I hear about different video games. And these days, what you get charged for is like to buy an update or to unlock something online. So people end up basically spending what almost feels like monopoly money buying all these things online. So
it's mad, isn't it? Yeah. They are playing on an addictive personality. I feel like it has to be regulated an awful lot better, just way better. The GAA, in fairness, have slowly taken steps, but you can never do enough to. It's such a kind of it is generally. I know you saw that outwardly in somebody, but it's generally a silent problem, kind of like probably like mental health problems or something like that as well. It's not something that you can see or identify, and those things are more dangerous than someone who's suffering because of a leg break or something like that. It's when you can't see it. It's when it's probably an even bigger problem and more worrying.
Yeah, and again, fair play to Con Kilpatrick to come out and talk like that on TV. I also wonder, is he a little bit of a doppelganger for Con O'Callaghan, or am I raving when I say that?
Bring him up on screen there. I can't. I'll have to see it.
Hold on, I thought I had it handy.
I didn't think so. It wasn't something that immediately jumped out at me, I have to say. But I know he had a lot of ladies swooning over him when his jersey ripped. He does look very like him there now, to be fair.
Yeah, what do people think? Does he look a bit like Con O'Callaghan?
Yeah, that's actually, I hadn't seen that before, but he does look quite like him there, in fairness.
Yeah, fair play to him getting up front and centre. And you know what? It actually just reminds me of Callum Robinson this week coming out talking. And like, number one, I'm not sure why Stephen Kenny chose to put him up, because he knows 40% of his squad isn't vaccinated. And I think that figure is something similar over in Premier League, for example. But that's 2 press conferences in a row, or 2 international windows in a row, where he's put someone up in front of the media, and you're like, are you trying to create a smoke screen to take the pressure off you by putting Callum Robinson in front of he's going to be asked. I mean, I think it's quite egregious that people go and openly ask someone, are you vaccinated? I mean, that's someone's personal health. Let them do what they want.
That's totally against all
GDPR
guidelines. Yeah.
And
totally.
like, we're talking about mental health. I mean, is this pylon on Callum Robinson when 92% of the country is vaccinated, and like he's had it twice now, so he's got natural immunity, which is stronger than getting the vaccine in terms of immunity. I'm not going down the road and saying who should do this, that, and the other, or whatever. I don't care, and that's the whole point. Sorry, it's not that I don't care. It's not my business to tell someone else what to do. And like, does this affect him now personally, that the amount of scrutiny on him? And by the way, when I say 2 guys in a row out at press conferences and then the massive scrutiny after it, I'm talking about James McLean and, of course, him attacking the media and stuff like that. And he had a very good performance the next day out, it must be said. But I just wonder, like, with Callum Robinson, is he going to be like, you know what, I'm coming over here and I've played 18 internationals for Ireland, and like, he's fine, he's only scored 1 goal, but he's clearly quite a good player and we can certainly do with it. But might he be like, do you know what? I don't need this. Are we haranguing players to this point? Like, people love saying mental health when it suits them, but like, that's not necessarily good for him.
Yeah, no, potentially. I don't know the type of character that he is, or whether he's kind of got a really thick neck. But you probably would need a thick neck over the next while to deal with the amount of scrutiny that he's going to get. Interestingly, I saw one of the best responses to a Twitter troll I've ever seen in recent days. Oisin Murphy, the jockey, he's going for I think it's his third British jockey championship in a row. He's fighting it out with William Buick for the title, and somebody tagged him as jockeys get it worse than anybody because, again, there's a lot of money involved, and people who have €2 on a horse think they can go and slate you online. But someone tagged him at Ush Murphy and said something along the lines of, "How did you get that 2-9 shot beaten? X, Y, and Z. Buick will have you for toast. You're a fraud," or something like that. And Oisin Murphy just texts back, "He doesn't eat carbohydrates," which I thought was a good response. Some of the jockeys actually get back at people on Twitter, and some of their responses are really good. Like Tom Marquand is another jockey, and he's going out with Holly Doyle. They're going out a long time, and someone tagged him and said, "So sick of Tom Marquand," or something like that, and he just responded, "And so is at Holly Doyle." I just thought it was brilliant. It's just. But Callum Robinson is definitely open to, I'd imagine, to be a lot of idiots giving him abuse over the next while, and depending on what sort of a fella he is, you could look at it and be like, "Is this really worth it?" That's what a lot of GAA players would say with some of the abuse that comes with it, particularly if you go on a night out. Like, is it really worth it? So hopefully that's not the case with him.
What do we make of the Micheál Donoghue situation? Because you'd Brian Hanley down as the favourite the other day. I think you were doing a story. Davy Fitz, maybe he wasn't going to be involved. To see John Fogarty saying that clubs had a number had approached him. I'm not really sure if I'd agree with that has been the case, but I mean, obviously John has his own sources. But as I said a couple of weeks ago, my understanding was that talks had broken down with Micheál Donoghue, that maybe it wasn't completely done. But now we're looking at a situation where maybe he might be in the mix again. I think to some degree, Galway probably feel like the options aren't really there.
You definitely wouldn't say there's not, a load of really obvious options there. I'm not sure at the outset. Micheál's interest was definitely peaked from what I can gather, but the same problems and the same reasons why he left in 2019 are probably still present at board level now, and that's just his disagreements with various personnel involved in the Galway board. That's still the same at the moment, I believe.
Well, then you'd hear talk of like want control of this, that, and the other, which we don't have that backed up. But you hear talks of fundings, but like maybe too much control of other things.
Yeah. So like I believe whatever interest had cooled in recent weeks, and I do believe he was nominated for the role. Along with Brian Hanley was nominated and Jeffrey Linsky were nominated by clubs. Davy Fitzgerald was not nominated. I believe Castlegar were one club that were going to nominate him. Now, I'm not sure if that's because he asked them to nominate him or because they just wanted to nominate him. But he wasn't nominated.
Wilson and Fergal Lynch are in there.
They're involved in Castlegar, yeah.
And you could see a Louis Mulqueen link with Liam Mellows. I'm not sure how close they are these days.
Potentially too. But so he wasn't nominated by a club. So officially he's not in the mix. And the only ones that are in the mix are Hanley and Linsky and Donoghue. Donoghue, it looked like he had removed himself from the mix. So it was Hanley and Linsky, and the interviews were to take place this week. But I don't know what you're hearing on the ground, but there wouldn't be a mad swell of optimism from my reading of the situation for the candidates involved at the moment. And I do think the vast majority seem to want Micheál Donoghue. Now there have to be some amount of water under the bridge for that to actually happen. And maybe
the chairman will be going, won't he? I mean, his term is done. So that's one part of it.
Yeah, but that would be done whenever the Galway convention is. But like the manager would more likely be in place before then. So the chairman and the various county board officials will be putting the manager in place. For my understanding of the situation, Davy is out of the mix at the moment. The way he would come back into the mix would be if the two that are nominated, Hanley and Linsky, basically, if they want to look beyond that, then they can look at other candidates that aren't nominated. Now, Davy had categorically said, essentially, that he wouldn't run against Donoghue. But I'd imagine he would like to be in the situation at the moment if Micheál Donoghue wasn't involved. It's a very convoluted situation, and the fact that Brian Hanley's over Crockwell this weekend and Jeffrey Linsky's involved with Loughrea this weekend just adds kind of more interest to it. I know it was mentioned in some quarters as well that Francis Ford and Noah Larkin as a tandem effort will be a possibility. My reading of the situation from what I believe anyway, from who I was talking to, that's not a runner and has never been a runner. They worked under Donoghue, and the only way they would be involved is if Donoghue was manager again.
Yeah, and we'll jump on then to Pat Ryan. He stepped down as the Cork under-20 manager. By God, he's had a seriously impressive run, winning two. Cork hadn't won one since, was it 1998? And then he wins 2 All-Ireland under-20 in the space of 6 weeks.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's not bad, is it?
Jesus.
It's and see, the thing about it is, kind of like Liam Sheedy in 2010 as well. Talk about, like, in a way, if you're going out at the right time, yeah, you don't know exactly the scenario around it, or why exactly he had to step aside, or whether he's taken on another job or not. But like, to get them over the line, having been so close to it, and maybe botched a couple of final efforts before that, after leaving with 2 All-Irelands in the space of 6 weeks, is savage. I see somebody saying there, I'm not giving advice to Galway hurling. I'm trying to explain the situation. I'm not telling them what to do, or far from it. I'm just trying to explain the situation.
And then, like, when TG Carr covered those games that Cork won en route to winning the under-20 All-Ireland, Wayne Sherlock, he did the pre- and post-match interviews. And for the 2021, I think a few weeks later, was it Donal O'Mahony was the man in front of the TV cameras. Now, I did interview him when he was appointed a couple of years ago. I found him to be an absolute gent that particular day. But it is interesting. He's not someone necessarily courting the limelight.
No, definitely not. No, that's one of the only times I can remember him. I was down there. I think we went down together to that launch. It was when Kieran Kingston was announced as senior manager, and Don Logue minor, and Pat Ryan under 20s. And I don't really remember him doing any interviews outside of that. He just seems to get on with his job. He was a deadly midfielder back in the day too. He used to just have the black Cooper no face guard out around the middle of the field. And I remember playing Sarsfield many moons ago at Burr, and he was still going at it around 07 or 08. But there was talks of him before Liam Cahill took over in Waterford. He was been heavily linked with that Waterford job as well. So you wouldn't know what the next step would be for him. Maybe potentially he'll be involved with the senior squad. You just don't know, or maybe someone might have to step away and he could be getting involved in there. You just don't know.
Yeah, do you know what? I want to quickly talk about the best number 10 in GAA in both codes. We I'd actually teed it up as the best number 1, I think, with the headline, but might as well just throw it up here quickly, because there were a few comments from the viewers that we have out there. Not as many as for some of the other positions. So
10's maybe not as obvious,
maybe not as sexy, the number 10s. But anyway,
I have someone in my head, and I'd be disappointed if he's not mentioned.
Okay, well, we see Paul Galvin is mentioned here. It's a great question for hurling, in fairness. Actually, when he played for Crokes there one year, I think he was wearing number 10 against us one day in the hurling. Paul Galvin mentioned again, Fergie Toohey, Jinxie Beggy, Brian Dooher. Let me just see, tweet was deleted there. So there actually weren't that many answers.
Johnny Dooley's the most obvious one.
Yeah,
number 10. Like, it's apart from in 2000, he was nearly wearing number 10 nearly all of his career. He was right half forward and nearly nowhere else, hitting frees, and just one of the most stylish players that we ever produced, and probably one of the most stylish players of that generation. So he definitely be the hurling one that I'd look at. Doer's a great one on a football side. Like that score against Kerry, like, he was known as kind of a workhorse almost. So like that outside of the right, few did it better than him. Like that score against Kerry after Kerry have a goal scoring chance or something, but I can't remember. But it worked the whole way up the field. And after making this gut busting run, what me or you or anyone else do, you just give a hand pass and stop moving, and he kicks it off the outside of the right underneath the Cusack stand. It was a thing of absolute beauty.
Yeah, Gerard Hegarty is probably setting himself up as a modern day number 10. But I do agree on the whole Paul Galvin thing. He was so good there for that burst, and Brian Whelan also. Is there any other number 10? I mean, these days players change their number so often. I don't know if you would kind of you would associate them with their number as much as you would before. Actually, in NFL, do you know, like before you used college numbers, you seem to be able to pick whatever number you like. But then once you go to the NFL, like tight ends would have been like number 80 to number 89 or whatever. And like the quarterbacks would have been like number 1 to something like number 14 or something, 13, something like that. I can't remember exactly, maybe even 15 because Mahomes is 15. But this past season now, they've allowed them to get their college numbers. So everyone in the NFL, or a huge amount of the players, have just changed their number. So
that's totally confusing for someone like me if I was trying to watch it. At least if I knew the 80 to 89 was a tight end, I'd have an idea who's on the pitch. But like, does Brady wear 43? Am I imagining that?
Brady wears 12.
12. Okay, so he's still within that. Okay,
yeah,
it does make sense, and it definitely makes it easier to explain. Anyway, imagine if we were just allowed to wear any number jersey we wanted in the GAA. It'd be mad. But it's kind of getting that way. Like the generation of guys coming through would say that are like maybe 15 or 16 now. They don't have an association with a number. A number is just not associated half as much now. They're so flexible. Like, remember, like number 4, like I'd always think of number 4, like Martin Hannamy was number 4. They always played number 4. Brian Whelan was always 5. Whereas now it's just kind of an interchangeable feast, really.
Do you remember, are you aware of Argentina? They used to pick their numbers, because it was probably everyone scrambling for number 10 or whatever. But back around 1978, 1982, it was done alphabetically. So, for example, in World Cup 1982, Ozzy Ardiles, who's a midfielder, was wearing number 1.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure their goalkeeper at maybe 78 their 2 goalies were wearing like number 5 and number 8 or something like that.
That's bizarre.
Mad stuff altogether. Ben O'Connor, there's a number 10 for you.
Yeah, he was a brilliant number 10. He did he play... When he got the goal in 05, I think he was marking Ollie Canning corner forward. He started corner forward, but he probably did. He definitely, because he was marking Martin Hannamy actually in 99. But I think he did most of his best hurling at 10. Yeah.
Yeah. See, Dan Shanahan, sometimes you think of him as number 10, but then like I've seen him 12, 14, 11. I mean, Dan, settle on a number and we can work you in here.
10 would be the one I would associate with most too, I have to say.
Yeah, and there's definitely a player or two we're not mentioning in here. But look, I'm going to put my neck on the block here and say, damn it, who am I going to say? I go with Joe Dooley. Yeah, I give you Joe Dooley.
Johnny Dooley.
Johnny Dooley. Sorry. Look, the Dooleys were fair yokes. Yeah. They could play any position as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
I go with Johnny Dooley as well, and I'd probably go with Paul Galvin for the footballers. Particularly as well, he won the 1,000 All-Star as a number 10, the number 10 on that 2014 maybe.
Maybe so.
I think so.
We're definitely missing out on someone here anyway. And I was even thinking that Clare team of the 90s, but sure, their numbers would have changed around a bit too. But
Fergie Toohey would have been 10 a good bit. I think he got his 4 points from half forward at number 10 in 95 final, all right.
Actually, I'm going to change to Ben O'Connor and I'm going to give it to Brian Dooher.
Okay, good man.
Not bad. Right, we'll jump on to the club action here. And I noticed Kevin O'Brien, who we had on from the 42 last week, said 2 weekends of club games still to go before dressing rooms are fully open. The weather is getting worse and 90% of the country is vaccinated. Doesn't make sense waiting until October 22nd. I don't think that's going to be the case in Antrim for the final between O'Donovan Rossa and Dunloy, though. I'm pretty sure that they'll be able to use the dressing rooms.
It could well be. I'm actually not aware of that, but we trained last night. We don't have lights in Burr on a full-size pitch, so we trained in Burr and Osprey last night. And like we don't have access to dressing rooms, something like that. So I jumped in the car, wiped myself down with a bit of a towel, changed clothes, and drove back up the road to Meath, which is just madness, really. I got a shower when I came back, but it's
you don't need a bit of a towel. You didn't take a full towel.
A bit of a towel, a hand towel. But as it's unbelievable, it's prime conditions for the Black Beetle. But it's prime conditions to get sick. It really is. And you're doing it for people's safety and well-being or whatever. But some amount of boys are going to have colds and flus over the next while. And the thing about now is the way people are now is a cold and flu. If someone starts sneezing now, everyone immediately thinks does this that have COVID or does she have COVID or whatever? So I just think it's an unnecessary situation. I just don't think there's any need, particularly for, say, someone like me who's driving a long distance. It's okay for some of the rest of the boys who drive the 25 minutes back to Burr and get a shower. But there's a couple of unique scenarios in every club. I remember chatting to Keelan Sexton last year, and he played a Clara club game and then had to jump straight in the car, an evening game, and drive back to Dublin. That kind of mad stuff.
Pádraig Keeshan has a question for you there.
We wouldn't go back out to Tipperary again, Park. No, we would. We had some great times in Ballingarry. Funny one about Ballingarry, we used to train there an awful lot. And in the build up to the 08 club final against Portumna, Portumna and Burr were both trained in Ballingarry, so we were both trained in the same pitch on different nights.
Yeah, we'd often had that over the years where we'd be training in Bray with Coola, and just after you'd have Kilmacud coming on using the same pitch.
It's mad, isn't it?
Yeah. Anyway, so O'Donovan Rasa and Dunloy. Rasa, they're looking to win I think they haven't been in a final since 2004, the West Belfast side. Dunloy are looking for 3 in a row. They've beaten St. John's well enough in the semi-final. I think it was rotten conditions in Dunsilly. Keelan Malloy scored 1-3 from play. Conal Cunning, he'd knocked over 8 points. Now, Rasa, a very fit, athletic team, went close enough last year, but they've beaten, en route to this now, they've beaten Lochgiel, which is no mean feat, and then Cushendall in a thriller was 4-18 to 3-20. Dara Rocks scored that late goal, bringing it over the line here. But I think most people would probably be sensing that Dunloy would get the 3 in a row done here, maybe just the experience as much as anything else.
Yeah, it's just the bigger names when you look down through guys that are in the Antrim team. You go down through Dunloy, we're looking at Conal Cunning, Keelan Malloy, who we've waxed lyrical about for a good while now, Ryan Elliott in goals, Sean Elliott, Kieran Johnson, Ryan McGarry, and Christy McMahon. So that's a fair spread of county players, and particularly guys that are starting on the Antrim team more often than not. Whereas Rasa, I think Ger Walsh is the only starter. They'd obviously have big Donal Nugent as well. And I saw Donal Nugent actually tweeting about Con Kilpatrick's story, and Donal has had kind of similar maybe problems over the last couple of years, and is a really interesting fella, and is a fine hurler as well. He's got some of the best wrists in the country. I'd say if we were doing best wrists, he wouldn't be too far off. But Rasa are definitely have definitely been getting better and better in recent years. But I'd always have an affiliation with Dunloy because we played against them several times down through the years. But you'd imagine they just have a bit more class when you're going down through. I've got a county player or 2 in every line of the pitch, whereas Rasa probably are relying on a couple of players a bit more. But as you say, they seem to be a very, very fit and athletic side, and they've taken 2 big scalps here. This is no fluke or anything like that. Definitely be expecting a tight game, but probably just favouring Dunloy.
I wonder, will there be tight games in Limerick? I suspect they will, with Patrick's against the Pierce and Kilmallock against Doon.
Yeah, you'd imagine so, Shane. Yeah, the Piercic, it's a funny one, and Jerome O'Connell was actually saying it the other day. For all the guys that they're missing, they've still been, unbelievably impressive so far. Because Podge Kendi hasn't played yet in goals. Mike Casey is unlikely to feature. Peter Casey won't feature. Jerome Boylan could be back for this weekend. And then they're coming up against a Patrick's Well side that probably misfired last weekend, and some of their bigger players probably misfired, but Jason Gallan was able to pull them over the line. So while we'd always be talking about Dermot Burns, Keane Lynch and Aaron Gallan, and probably maybe Kevin O'Brien as well, it's a good sign that someone else was able to step up for them when their bigger players were quiet. But yet I'd probably still be favouring the Piercic here. It's just players like Kevin Downs, David Dempsey, Adrian Breen, obviously Will O'Donoghue enforcing things around the middle of the park as well. Their strength in depth to be able to adapt, minus the names I just mentioned, is fairly phenomenal. They've had teams at arm's length so far this year, despite missing many of their bigger players. Yeah,
it is an opportunity for Patrick's Well, but they do need to get all those lads firing. Dermot Burns, I think, started the game really, really well last week against Adair in that 2-point win. But Keane Lynch is going to need to be on the ball constantly in this game. Will Keane Lynch be coming up directly against Will O'Donoghue? Now, even if he plays in the half-forward line, never mind midfield, because Will O'Donoghue has played centre-back for the club before. So that would be a nice little sideshow, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think Will O'Donoghue physically matches up well with nearly everybody. He's not too big to be immobile. He's not too small to not be able to. I think he's 6'2" and his build is the perfect kind of size to be able to mix it with anybody. He can overpower a smaller player, maybe like he has overpowered the likes of Jamie Byrne. And I'd love to see him coming up against Lynch. I would love to see Will O'Donoghue going up against someone like Michael Fenley in his heyday. I think that'd be a real kind of clash of the Titans as well. But as was seen last weekend, if Keane Lynch is held to some extent, the Well are probably going to struggle. So you'd imagine Nick Pearson could be trying to keep it tight in around that middle third, and probably Will O'Donoghue probably will be the closest person to him at most stages, you'd imagine.
Yeah, that's going to be a good game to watch. Just a reminder, please do subscribe to the channel. It helps the channel grow because YouTube recommends it to other people who are interested in GA. Hit that button in the bottom right-hand corner. If you want the audio podcast, it is patreon.com/OurGame. And Kilmallock against Doon. Like, Doon have been here so often and still haven't gotten over the line by winning the county title, whereas Kilmallock, I mean, they have done it. We saw them in an All-Ireland final when they misfired badly against Ballyhale. There was it 6 or 7 years ago. But they probably have a bit more experience at that level. I don't know if you saw that point that Graham Mulcahy set up the other day where he chopped it back between his legs and his teammate knocked it over.
Yeah, he's obviously showing John Kiley that Keane Lynch isn't the only one that can do it within the Limerick fold. You'd have to say that Kilmallock haven't looked as nearly as impressive as previous years. And like what we're looking at the moment, it does look like they're on the wane a bit. Like, with due respect to South Liberties, Kilmallock would have been 6 or 7 points better than them, before this year or in previous years or when they were absolutely flying. So I definitely would be favouring Doon there. They obviously have lost Barry Murphy now to the Cruciate, but with the likes of Adam English there, Darragh O'Donovan, I can't think of Darragh's brother's name off the top of my head at the moment, Pat Ryan as well. Anytime we've played Doon, they've always been, a formidable outfit. And they look like the sort of team, like they won a big semi-final last year. Can't remember who they beat, but it could have been Kilmallock. They took out somebody big in a semi-final last year, minus Darragh O'Donovan. And, missing marquee
Richie
players.
English out as well.
Yeah, it could have been Richie English out as well, yeah. And they seem to be able to cope with marquee players missing. So I'd probably be favouring Doon there as well. Kilmallock are going to have to pull a performance that we haven't seen yet this year, whereas Doon have been, pretty consistent the whole way through.
Yeah, I see a couple of comments here that Wayne McNamara did a pretty good job against Lynch last weekend. Wayne McNamara, very unlucky not to have an All-Ireland medal, just missed the boat at his retirement. Super player, says James S. Same with James Ryan, Jim Bob.
Yeah, he was captain in 2017, actually. Hannon only took over the captaincy from him in 2018. So, that'll show you the esteem he was held in. If he'd been able to, obviously his age profile meant he probably couldn't hang on any longer.
Yeah. Wayne McNamara trained with us once in Coola. I think he must have been just up in Dublin for a while or whatever. But, very good player. I thought he was really good there for a spell for Limerick. The quarterfinals are on in Kilkenny this weekend. Mulnavata against O'Loughlin's, Bennett's Bridge against Shamrocks. That's obviously a repeat of their thriller from the group stages when there was 8 goals in the final quarter of the game. James Stevens up against Dixborough, so that's a nice city derby, and Clara against Tolerton here. Do you want to start off with the Bennett's Bridge against Shamrocks one?
Yeah, the Bennett's Bridge drew the short straw there, having to play Ballyhale after winning the league final.
Their first league final, I think.
Yeah, I think it was up until a couple of years ago, they were junior, and then they went on that incredible run where they won, I think, the junior All-Ireland and then the intermediate All-Ireland, and might have contested a senior county final in their first year back up.
They did a few years ago, and I think did they misfire in that game completely?
Yeah, beaten by Ballyhale. Yeah, they didn't misfire too badly. Ballyhale won convincingly enough in the end, but it was tight enough the whole way through. But
and with Shefflin's first year as manager, I'm just looking at the score. Yeah. Actually, it was close enough, but I feel like they always had it at arm's length. But it was 220 to 217.
Yeah, the availability of the Mullins will be probably key this weekend. Darren Mullen and Paddy Mullen both came on last weekend. Adrian didn't feature. I think he has a broken hand, so I don't know whether he's going to feature this weekend. The problem with picking up any sort of a knock or having any sort of an ailment is how quickly the games are going to be played. So, but we've seen, you went through their scores on the Monday. When you have Brian Cody, TJ Reid, Colin Fennelly, still have Joey Holden in the back, Dean Mason in goals, Dara Corcoran. They've loads of other firepower there. But if one or two of the Mullins are available, you'd have to be fancying them here. And they've had their card well marked by the Bridge from that group game as well. Saying that, you could look at it from a Bennett's Bridge point of view, you look at it as we're going really, really well this year. We've beaten them already. We've won the league final. They were missing a few last week. I think Sean Morrissey was missing. Rob Lennon was missing. Liam Blanchfield got 4, I think, last week. Willie Murphy got 5. They're coming in really good form. They know how to beat Ballyhale. But like, this is one of those games where you're just thinking that, you know, this is the league game and Bennettsbridge are winning. You just think it turns the other way and Ballyhale are gonna. I'd be surprised if Ballyhale don't win by 4 or 5. Being honest.
And you'd think that the league final was a bit of a dead rubber between Bennettsbridge and Clara. All those players that were out, you know, you mentioned Sean Morrissey and Rob Lennon in particular, I'd imagine they'll play this weekend. So maybe they were sort of rested. That kind of tells you, I don't like the league final isn't a massive deal in Kilkenny, obviously. No. And they put up a scoreline of 19 points to 16, whereas Ballyhale's was 3-23 against Greg Ballycallan. Like Ballyhale have scores in them. They have goals for fun. So if they get a few against Bennettsbridge there, it's going to be an uphill battle for Bennettsbridge. With Dan Shanahan there as coach.
You can imagine this is another goal fest, another two massive score tallies coming up against each other. It was Ballyhale finished with 6-11, was it, in the group game, and Bennettsbridge had something like 3-23 off memory, and Ballyhale had 3-23 last and conceded 2-20. So you'd imagine this would be, as it's actually, the quarterfinals are all really interesting, but you'd imagine this would be a cracker and it'd be a really, really high scoring game. But go on.
Do you think the hunger in Ballyhale might wane at any stage? I mean, history suggests not, because I think 1 in every 8 of the seasons of their existence, they've won the All-Ireland. So obviously this club keeps coming back.
History suggests that they know when to get right when it matters most. And evidence of recent weeks would suggest that they're already on their way to doing that. So I don't know. It's very hard to say unless you can see what's going on within the camp, because you've been in camps where you think everything is okay and then you lose that game and you're knocked out and you're like, sure, X, Y, and Z was wrong. So
all the signs were there.
Yeah. So we won't really know until it happens, but don't see it happen this weekend.
Yeah, they have had a few frights this year, so it will be interesting to see where that goes. James Stephens against Dicksboro, that is the city derby. Are the Village one of the best placed teams to make a bit of a jump this year, or is the Conor Brown injury going to catch up with them?
Yeah, Conor Brown's obviously a massive loss, but they've been very consistent even without him. And you definitely would if you're looking at a form graph of them against Dicksboro, you definitely would say the Village are going an awful lot better. They obviously won the Shield final last weekend, beat Mullinavat. I think one of our viewers said that Owen Larkin was back in tow as well, and he came in. I think it was Butler. His second name was Butler. One of our viewers, anyway. He's a regular viewer, and Joe Butler. Yeah, like Owen Larkin's obviously a great man to have back on board too. Luke Scanlon, Owen Guilfoyle, Matt Root is still going strong for them as well. Niall Brasley is centre back. If Conor Brown is able to get back fit over the coming weeks, I think nothing only a county championship would suffice for them, especially after running Ballyhale so close last year. But these kind of derby games are very unique within Kilkenny. Like O'Loughlin's playing the Village out of form would still be fancying themselves. Dicksboro, who are out of form, would still fancy themselves against the Village. It's just kind of all bets are off when they come up against each other and that local rivalry comes into it. But you'd have to say the Borough aren't going particularly well. But now is the time, and there's no better opposition to turn it on against.
Yeah, they do have a few dangerous forwards. My own namesake, Shane Stapleton, I presume he's starting this year. Bill Sheehan. Pádraig Fanning, who's over the team, he obviously had to deal with the fact that Colin Bonner left right as the season was getting going. I think after the first group game, was it?
Yeah.
And he's brought Tony Brown in, the Waterford legend, since then. But I think Ollie Walsh is out, and like he's a very fine hurler out around, whether he's in the half-backs or midfield. So yeah, that'll be a tough one for them. The next fixture that we'll talk about, I suppose, will be Clara against Tolerton. So I was watching the highlights of Clara last week in the defeat to Bennettsbridge. They're probably not quite up at the same level they were at, and Lester Ryan pulled his hamstring and he went off after 5 minutes. Like, this is a team that like 5 or 6 years ago came up from intermediate, won that grade, and then came up and won senior immediately. So obviously plenty of good players there. But against Tolerton were really good against Castlecomer Aaron's Own last week. Tommy Walsh scored a beautiful point at one stage. He had it on the right sideline, turned back on his left and cut it over from an unbelievably tight angle. So that was very impressive there. So Tolerton against Clara will be a tight one, but I'd be just about going with Tolerton, probably on the basis that Lester Ryan is going to be out.
I'd be the same, Shane. To be honest with you, that tips the balance for me. And you obviously have Tolerton are coming in good form. There's a plethora of watches there, and I believe they were all in pretty good form last weekend. And they've they've done well at senior level, having coming up. They've been consistent. They obviously should have beaten Ballyhale last year. Were unlucky to end up in a relegation semi-final last year. Won it. I'd have quite a fancy for Tolerton there. The caveat is whether Leicester is fit or not, really.
Yeah. And then Mulnavat against O'Loughlin Gales. Last one there.
Yeah, Mulnavat were beaten well in the Shield final last weekend by the Village. On O'Loughlin's, who weren't going particularly well, look to have things more, and they've probably made a few switches in their team as well. Hugh Lawler went from midfield back to centre back. Paddy Deegan is still in the forward. I think he got 5 points last weekend. Owen Wall is still going well. He got a goal and a point last weekend. Mark Bergen is still operating in their forward line as well. So I'd probably be favouring O'Loughlin's there as well. But really interesting quarterfinals. The Bridge and Shamrock's been the highlight there, and it wouldn't be unreal. Like, we're doing power rankings fairly soon. Like, where do Ballyhale go in the power rankings if they're dumped out this weekend?
This is the thing. Like, well, they're out of it. We can't rank a team that's no longer there. By the way, the relegation semi-finals are also on. Erin's Owner against Greg Ballycallan, and both teams performed relatively well last week. And also Lisdowney are going to be against Aurora. So in the Tipperary, there's only one game in the Tipperary Senior Hurling Championship this weekend in terms of knockout games to go on and win the county. The relegation semis are between Aerogue and Carty-Donahill. They're up against Holy Cross Ballycal, and then McCarthy Burris are up against Rossgrey. Aerogue, they won a couple of relegation battles last year, staying up in both hurling and football. Holy Cross have been pretty good and probably have the bit more talent. I think Brian O'Mara been missing after breaking his arm a second time, hasn't been ideal for them. Cathal Barrett playing out the field a bit. While Carkey, they performed really well in their group against everybody. They were beaten. I think their score differential after losing all 3 games is like -8 points. So that tells you how good they've been playing, and they've some good young talent. Rossgrey took a beating against Burrislee, but otherwise they were very competitive against both Killarwan and Nina. No, so we'll move on to the preliminary quarter-final, the one that's of real interest to people in Tipperary this weekend. Lockmore Castleiney against Killinall. So because Killinall won the South, I mean, people love the old setup of the Tipperary Championship because there's like all the divisions and then it feeds back into the counties and there's a back door here and all that. And I had a couple of lads ribbing me about it this morning. So Killinall are in a preliminary quarter-final after winning the South. So this is to get back into the county. But you wonder, is their focus the Seamus O'Reen Cup? So, I mean, that's how convoluted it is. Because in terms of, like, there's the Dan Breen, which is the county title at the top tier. Then there is the Seamus O'Reen Cup. But because of the divisions, you can actually get back into the top level in the Dan Breen. So, yeah, exactly. Killinall are South champions, okay? So that got them into the Dan Breen. But they're also still contesting the Seamus O'Reen. Doesn't that make sense?
So, can they win the 2 of them?
Yeah.
What? So they can be Senior A and Senior B. Here. That is only in tip. In all fairness, only in tip. That's just ridiculous. It doesn't make sense. And how are all these games going to be played? Just say if they keep winning senior, how many more senior games do they have to win to be county champions? To win Dan Breen?
I'm not even sure if Killinall are still in the football too.
So they could win a prelim quarter-final, a regular quarter-final, a semi-final, and a county final. So that's 4. And then they could be playing Seamus O'Reen. So what are they be doing? Playing Seamus O'Reen on the Saturday and senior on the Sunday, and then playing football the other weekends.
Look, I mean, it seems doable.
Oh, I hope they win this weekend. Just it'd be a great thing to follow over the next couple of weekends. Killinall's search for 3 senior county titles in 1 year in 2 codes.
Yeah, so the McGraths anyway. Like, Lockmore got to the county final last year and only lost to that last second goal to Killadangan when Brian Malachny put it into the back of the net. But they have the McGraths here and they've been moving pretty well. But like, Bubbles is still on the Killinall team. The Feehans, who we've seen involved with Tipperary footballers in recent times. Like, I do fancy Lockmore to get through here, to be fair.
It's this game is probably a bit of a nuisance for Lockmore in many ways. If they'd qualified direct, they would have had a weekend off potentially, wouldn't they? Whereas this is a disaster. It's just another game kind of on top of them. If my memory serves me correct, Killinall were beaten in the O'Reen semi-final last year, weren't they, by Lura, I think. So all of a sudden, having been beaten in the Oreen semi-final, they could be in the quarter-final of the Danbreen, which is just mad. But like, you wonder why things go a bit askew in Tipperary when you have situations like this arising.
We're some
your some yokes, all right. Yeah, it's hardly surprising why things go wrong regularly.
Longford hurling final is on this weekend. The Slashers are against
one
Kerry.
stronghold to another, Shane.
Yeah, it's true. A bit of blue and gold on both counties.
Yeah.
The
Slashers up against Carrick. Yeah, I looking back through the history books and I can't find. I'm not sure. I don't know if any viewers will know whether Carrick St Mary's is a new club or not, but I couldn't find any records of them been in a county final before. So that's according to the records I was looking at. Then you have Slashers having won one in 20. Wolf Tones, the Mastrom club, they're by far the most dominant club in Longford with 20 county titles. So it's a fairly novel kind of final, to say the least there, all right.
Yeah, the Laois final is on, relegation final is on tonight. Abbey Leaks against the Harps. The sort of game that, like, the pressure of being in a game like that is rotten, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I said nobody wants to be there. It's the final that nobody wants to win. I always think it's totally wrong and ironic that a relegation match should be called a final. Like, it's not a final. No, people want to play finals. Nobody wants to play in this. They need to come up with some sort of real derogatory name for it. Maybe something like that, or the relegation misery, or something like that, or I don't know, something that makes it actually clear how bad this is. Like, if you told a non-GA person, we have a relegation final tonight, they'd be like, I'm just going to put an English accent. They'd be like, oh, well, best of luck. I hope you win the cup, mate. And we're like, no, there's no cup on the line here.
With rugby, they probably would find a reason to put a cup into it. Sure, like England plays Scotland.
So.
There's a cup, lads. Yeah, sure, why not?
The Calcutta Cup, yeah.
And final that definitely nobody wants to be in. Good one here from Irish Sports. I'd love to get the identity here. I got detention for watching the Hurling Show in fourth year Irish.
Good man yourself. That's the job. That's what I love to hear. Any teacher that gives you detention for watching the Hurling Show is no friend of the shows, I can tell you that.
Absolutely not. There's some games on in Galway this weekend, plenty going on.
Just a quick one, Shane, on Laois. I think there are two quarterfinals in Laois as well, just while we're chatting there. So Rathdowney Earl against Rosenallis. Rosenallis were kind of the surprise packets last year, got through to a semi-final. You'd have to be favouring Rathdowney there. Paddy Purcell obviously be running the show, Ross King and a few more. And then you have Castletown and Camross in the other quarter-final. Camross won the minor, I think, last week. And last year was one of the first times that they weren't, in the real knockout stages. So I'm sure they'll be looking to get back there. Castletown again would have been a club we would have come up against fairly regular with Bird. There have been some great battles down through the years. Then in Galway,
the Donkey Derby was probably the biggest classic ever out of Castletown.
One of the greats of all time. That was brilliant, wasn't it?
Yeah. Jesus people need Christ, to look that up. Classic. You don't know what we're talking about. Was it the Castletown Donkey Derby? Is that what it was called?
I think that's what it was called. Yeah,
that was great.
You're guaranteed a laugh anyway.
He's gone stone mad. He's gone stone mad for the bushes or something like that. When the donkeys went off course and ran straight into the bush. He's stone mad for the bushes.
There's nothing like we used to have a donkey derby we had a vintage week every summer in Burr, because it's kind of a Georgian town. So they do a vintage week where they go back through all old traditions, and donkey derby was one of them. Like, essentially, it's just an excuse for lads to get hopped, usually. The donkeys rear up and lads get hopped and everyone thinks it's hilarious. And that's basically it. Brilliant, James
Derby, otherwise known as the Tip County Championship. How dare you?
Good man.
Yeah, we'll jump into the Galway Championship. Group 1, Crockwell against Castlegar, Haskra Fahina against Turlough. So on points at the moment, Crockwell and Turlough have 3 points each. Castlegar are on 2 and Haskra are on the bottom at the moment. So plenty can happen in that group. Capitagular
the Galway, like the setup of the table is even interesting. They have the points first rather than the game. Is that the way? The points are usually at the end, aren't they? Of a table, normally, so that you can see them. So I was even confused because I thought they'd played. I thought the top two teams had played 3 games when I looked at that. But you'd be looking at Turlough as favourites. Haskra were kind of the surprise packets last year, with the 2 Manions obviously. But Turlough were in a county final last year, and obviously Dottie Burke could be driving it forward there. I think Barry Cullinan, who who there's an interview with him on Our Game. I think is heavily involved with Turlock more. Francis Ford is obviously a selector and coach with them as well, but definitely be favouring Turlock there. Crockwell and Castlegar are very interesting. Brian Hanley's obviously over Crockwell, and Castlegar have Fergal Lynch, the bruiser, and Saoirse Bulfin over them. And when we played Castlegar early in the year with Byrne, I was very impressed with them. So I'd be mildly surprised if they didn't win that one.
Yeah, Thomas are top of a group that contains Capatagle, Daly and Liam Mellows. So it's in terms of points, Thomas is 4, Cappy 3, Daly 1, and Liam Mellows are on 0 after 2 games played here. So this weekend it is Capatagle against St. Thomas's. So that's top of the table clash there. If Capatagle win against Thomas's, neither team can be caught, and Daly against Liam Mellows. The Mellows are out of the picture in terms of qualification at the moment. Actually, there might be a third place team getting through there somewhere, so I might have that a little bit wrong because there's 3 groups. In the other one, it's Ormore Maria against Tommy Larkins. I don't know, did you see Jason Flynn's sideline that was cut over?
Yeah, savage, like a draw. Just pulled it back in, aimed at about 10 yards left of the left-hand post and just drew it back in. It was beautiful.
Yeah, and Sarsfields are against Loughrea as well. So I presume it's a case of 2 teams getting through in all 3 groups, and then maybe 2 third places. So probably should have checked that beforehand. But look, we're not known for.
And sure, the winners of the South chain can come back into it if it's anything like Tip.
Well, that's if they're not playing in the Seamus O'Reen and the football championship as well. By the way, you wanted to talk about the Leinster Senior Hurling Championship draw because why did you want to talk about it?
Yeah, no, I just saw it this morning because we kind of teed it up a few times before. We never got to see Coola playing off against Ballyhale Shamrocks when they were both in their pomp. And that's not to say that they're both in their pomp now, but if they were to both win their county championships, they would have to win a couple more games each. Kilkenny champions would have to win 2 games, and Dublin would have to win 2 games as well before they could play an eventual kind of a dream final, a dream Leinster final. So the quarterfinals are Carlow champions against Kilkenny champions, Laois against Wexford. So Rapparees would be waiting a long time until the 28th of November to play. So they won't have played hurling. They'd have had all focus on football at the Starlights side of the club there before they go back playing hurling. And then you have the Westmeath champions against Dublin. 2 plays 3. So you have Laois, the winners of Laois and Wexford playing off against the winners of Westmeath and Dublin. And somehow the Offaly champions have gotten a bye, I'm not sure how, into the semi-finals. It would have been the most unlikely of the counties to get a bye into the semi-finals. And the Offaly champions have played the winners of Carlow and Kilkenny. And the final has been played. Yeah, it would be grand, wouldn't it? It'd be lovely. I have my eye on this weekend before then. If we don't beat Shinrone on Saturday, there'll be no Leinster Championship, there'll be no nothing. So it's just interesting. The final has been played 6 days before Christmas, so it's down for decision on the 19th of December. So we'll be kept entertained with hurling shows right up until Christmas by the looks of things.
Which is absolutely ideal. And what's the Clara man, Conor Phelan, he's over Mount Leinster Rangers, and so he's going to be up against a Kilkenny team in the first week, which is would he care?
Well, he's involved. He's obviously a selector with Brian Cody as well. So it could potentially get a bit messy there. Like you were mentioning about Paul Curran being part of the Tipperary management. I always find it interesting. Obviously, Owen Kelly played with Mullinahone and is still playing with them and would have came up against the likes of Brian Hogan and even Bonner Matter last year. But lads are different. Some lads could be different on the pitch. Like if you're an old miserable corner back and you could be, saying stuff to the corner forward or something like that, and then you're going into a county squad and you have to be real nice to them and they have to respect you. So I always think it can get a bit messy if you're still playing and you're involved in a management team. Yeah,
a little bit. Yeah, Padjo Clifford says, who are the favourites for the Tip Intermediate Hurling Championship? Well, there's 3 tiers, obviously. There's the Dan Breen, there's the Seamus O'Reen, and there's the Intermediate Hurling Championship after that. And it's unbelievably difficult to call. I'm just looking at some of the team names here. Burrs Kane, Mindtable Tui, they won well the other day. Moneygall, North champions, I know. Knockavilla Kickham's, even though they lost.
So Moneygall should be in the Offaly Championship.
Well, fair enough. You say that to the Moneygall boys, they'll love hearing that. Knockavilla doing well, even though they lost all those players to Cashel King Cormacs, who should be in the mix for the Seamus to win the Seamus O'Reen. Maybe Ballynahinch, Ballingarry, some of those clubs there. to answer your question, Padjo, I haven't a clue who's going to win it. And I'd say none of those teams themselves have a clue who's going to win it. Was there anything else we wanted to touch on finally before we finished up? Just what happened actually with the Kerry situation.
Yeah, no, I just thought it was interesting. I was on the Zoom call the other night for the Kerry County Board meeting. Started at 8 o'clock. And really, like, there was a couple of items on the agenda. But the only item on the agenda really was the Kerry senior football job and the various things that went on around that. So the Kerry chairman, Tim Murphy, gave a brief kind of timeline of what exactly happened to try and, I suppose, explain things a bit better, because there was various narratives and whatever within the media. And then Peter Keane put out his statement. And then there was, I'm going to say, about 7 to 8 different club delegates had various bits and pieces to say on the matter. And there was a statement read out from the St. Mary's Carsavine Club, which would be the club of Peter Keane and the club of Maurice Fitzgerald, and the same club that Peter Keane won their lotto the other night, which I just thought was hilarious. So he was compensated with 2,300 for the hardship he's had over the last couple of weeks. But so there was a good bit of unrest, to be honest with you, about the whole situation, about how the interview process was dealt with, about how a lot of people felt Peter Keane was disrespected. The Listry Club suggested that Peter Keane should be given another year for 2022. That kind of fell on deaf ears, didn't have any support. And everybody basically said what they had to say. And then Tim Murphy, the chairman, answered all their questions individually. And in fairness, I thought he explained their side fairly well. And I wasn't a big fan of how they did the process, and I don't think they covered themselves in glory. But I thought he stood over his own comments fairly well, I thought, and was not happy with I think he described them as disgraceful, disrespectful, and the lowest of the low, some of the commentary around it. And I think it was kind of saying that some of the stuff that was even put out in the media as well, and kind of seemed to think that there was a hidden agenda against the process or against the people involved. And there was all sorts of shenanigans suggested as well, that some of the people on the 5-man committee had previously worked under Jack O'Connor or had played under him and this kind of crack. But eventually, after an hour, it was basically agreed that Jack O'Connor would be the new manager, Dermot Murphy as a selector, and Micheál Kirk, the former Laois manager, as a selector. No mention of whether Paddy Talley would be involved, the former Down manager, but it does look like that is going to be the case.
So when we talked about, we both felt that this was dealt with really poorly by the Kerry County Board, and that Peter Keane, he could have been treated a little bit better, in the sense of, it was kind of made obvious that he had to apply for his job again. But like, we kind of felt that, well, look, I mean, the job is gone from him. Just have a conversation with him and tell him, look, you've done your term and we're not going to reappoint you. Did you come away from that press briefing thinking any differently about the treatment, how this was dealt with overall by Kerry?
Well, that conversation never happened. They're not going to say it happened anyway, even if it did. But Tim Murphy said he was in regular correspondence with Peter Keane, and that Peter Keane was well aware of the situation when it was put up for interview, well aware that he would have to re-interview himself. And Tim Murphy said he presented an excellent presentation, and that they were very impressed with. So I don't know what Jack O'Connor brought to the table, but it must have been very, very impressive, and it must have been even better than what Stephen Stack brought to the table. I just think it probably need to be more kind of transparent, maybe, even media-wise, nationally, just to maybe paint a picture. I always think you're better off painting the narrative the way you want to paint it, rather than letting people paint their own one, if you know what I mean. Because people will run away with themselves. And they thanked Peter Keane, and they said that they basically weren't going to thank him until the new manager had been ratified. But you kind of think the horse had bolted then. And Tim Murphy, I thought, dealt with it very well. But Peter Keane releasing a statement would definitely suggest that the interactions that Peter Keane had with the board were not as satisfactory as what the county board would suggest. I'll put it to you that way.
Yeah, true. James, soon there will be Shane St. Cyr in that mess of a championship, obviously referring to Tipperary. Just a reminder, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the show by hitting that button in the bottom right-hand corner. It really helps the channel grow. It's absolutely free to do, so there's no reason not to. If you are interested in the shows, please do it. You'll be helping out a lot. Also, patreon.com/OurGame is where you'll get the audio podcast, so it's a good way to support the channel as well. We nearly have it all said, have we?
All said, Shane, all said. Yeah, another busy weekend ahead. Looking forward to seeing what highlight reel we have to discuss on Monday.
Absolutely. Right, chat to you then.
Cheers, Shane.
The Hurling Show, brought to you in association with Torpy. Torpy are leading hurling into a new future with Bamboo, a revolutionary hurley created using their unique engineered hurling performance know-how. Already being used by many inter-county players, Torpy's Bamboo is highly sustainable, offers players greater striking distance and a more consistent balance every time, without compromising on natural feel. Check them out on the Torpy website and in the link below, and enter the promo code OurGame to get yourself 10% off.